Chapter 724. 5 or 6 people walked out with big and small bags and got into 2 off-road vehicles. Tang Zheng furrowed his brows. Although they were separated by a street, he could still feel the murderous aura from them. There was also a strong energy. This meant that not only were their hands stained with blood, but they had also been in a graveyard full of energy all year round. That was why they were so stained with energy. They really are grave robbers. A cold light flashed in Tang Zheng's eyes. He was like a lurking tiger staring at a pack of wolves. Vroom. The off-road vehicle started, and with a graceful swerve of its tail, it sped away, leaving behind a trail of dust. Professor Qi hurriedly urged Tang Zheng, "Quick, don't lose them. We can't run away. Sit tight." Tang Zheng also started the car. The roar of the engine made people's blood boil. This car was specially prepared for him by Mu Hongyan. It had been carefully modified, and its performance was much better than other cars. "Old Qi, be careful," Old Wei said worriedly. Professor Qi's face was red as if he had a second spring. He waved his hand proudly and said, "Don't worry, wait for my triumphant return. This discovery will definitely shock the world." He was full of confidence, like a fighter. Vroom. Tang Zheng started the car and roared away, following the grave robbers from afar. One in front and one behind, the 2 groups of people drove out of the capital and onto the highway. Tang Zheng looked at the road signs. These people were heading south. As for their destination, it was unknown. The grave robbers were very vigilant. If not for Tang Zheng being careful, he would have been discovered several times. Night fell. The grave robber got off the highway and stopped in front of a small hotel. "What do we do?" Professor Qi asked. Tang Zheng was bold and said, "Let's go to the hotel. They haven't seen us before, so there's no need to be afraid." Professor Qi was eager to try. This was an unprecedented experience. He was so excited that his cheeks were red. He rubbed his hands and said, "We'll have to face the grave robbers in a while." Tang Zheng patted his shoulder and said, "Professor Qi, calm down. It's just a few grave robbers." Professor Qi said disapprovingly, "You don't know how much archaeologists hate grave robbers. If we can catch them with the stolen goods and hand them over to the police, it will be a great deed." "Okay, after it's done, we'll hand them over to the police," Tang Zheng promised. By the time the 2 of them got out of the car, the grave robber had already checked in. He watched the other party go upstairs from afar. Professor Qi's eyes were fixed on the back of the grave robber. His eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. Cough. Tang Zheng coughed lightly and reminded Professor Qi to pay attention because the hotel owner was already paying attention to them. Professor Qi blushed and quickly retracted his gaze. 2 rooms. It's obvious that you're the ones who controlled the girl to do those dirty things. I want to call the police. I want the police to arrest you." Professor Qi's voice was loud and righteous, but it made the group of people's eyes shine fiercely. They shouted unscrupulously, "Where did this old man come from? You dare to call the police? When the police come, don't even think about pleasing them." When Tang Zheng heard this, his heart suddenly lit up, and he finally guessed that the woman was actually a young lady who came out to sell herself, and Professor Qi was impossible. With Tang Zheng's understanding of him, other than being obsessed with archaeology, this old man would not have much interest in women, let alone at his age. He would not be able to do anything, and his taste would not be that low. This was a trap, an immortal's trap. Although Tang Zheng had never really encountered it, he had made many friends with people from all walks of life. He still knew a little about this kind of dirty trick. Perhaps, the 2 of them had been targeted since they entered the hotel. The boss must have been in cahoots with this group of people. When he saw that the 2 of them were foreigners, he had evil intentions. He must have thought that the old man was easy to fool and chose to target Professor Qi. Tang Zheng's face sank. This group of people was really King shameless. They actually dared to target Professor Qi. This old man had done research all his life and must have valued his reputation very much. Now that he was slandered as a prostitute, it would be worse than death. Tang Zheng did not delay and rushed over with large strides. The few burly men only felt their bodies sway and were pushed aside. The next second, they saw a young man standing in front of the old man. The bald man stared and disdainfully said, "Oh, You actually have an accomplice. So what? This old man bullied my little sister. If he doesn't give an explanation, no one can step out of this door. Tang Zheng turned a deaf ear and supported Professor Qi. Professor Qi, what is going on? Hearing Tang Zheng call him professor, the bald man became even more arrogant. It was as if he had eaten stimulants. He shouted loudly, so it's still a professor, a beast with a human face. I think it's more like a beast. If you don't give me an explanation, I'll go to your unit and ask for an explanation. The bald man was an experienced person. He was ecstatic. This time, he had really picked up a treasure. This kind of person was most afraid of people going to his unit to cause trouble. In order to keep the peace, he had to give enough lottery tickets. The bald man's eyes were red. It was as if he could see a sky full of money flying towards him like a fairy scattering flowers. Professor Qi indignantly explained the whole story. It turned out that when he was resting, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. When he opened the door, he saw a woman with heavy makeup. The other party rushed into his room without saying anything and tried to sell him her services. Although Professor Qi was obsessed with research, he still knew that the other party was a woman who had lost her virginity. Although this group of people often appeared in the news, it was the first time he had seen it. It was very fresh. Of course, he definitely did not have any improper thoughts. He just felt that the other party was very pitiful, so he tried his best to persuade her to take the right path. He even promised to find a job for her when he returned to Beijing. He never thought that his love would harm himself. The door was pushed open with a bang, and then a group of people surrounded him fiercely. They insisted that Professor Qi was an old man who did not respect himself and bullied a woman. Professor Qi was a scholar who met a soldier. He could not explain himself clearly and was unable to defend himself. He was said to be useless by the other party. His part-time job was to call a beast with a human face but a beast's heart. Seeing Tang Zheng, Professor Qi's heart finally returned to his stomach. He grabbed Tang Zheng's hand and explained, "Don't believe their words. I'm really wronged." Tang Zheng smiled coldly and glanced at the people opposite him. "Of course I know you're wronged. This group of people came with ill intentions. They're obviously here to extort money. Professor Qi, you've been fooled." Professor Qi's face was bitter. Although he was a titan in the archaeological world, he was helpless in the face of these things. He said dejectedly, "Then what should we do?" "Pay up. You have to pay up." The bald man shouted first. "Professor Qi, sit on the chair and rest. I'll take care of it." Tang Zheng comforted him. He turned his eyes and saw a few familiar faces at the door. It was the group of grave robbers. One of the grave robbers pointed at the dejected Professor Qi and whispered to him. Tang Zheng's heart trembled as he had a bad premonition. As expected, the grave robber looked at Tang Zheng and Professor Qi warily, then turned around and left. "I've been exposed." Although Tang Zheng did not know how the other party found out, he was still exposed. This matter was troublesome. However, he did not have time to chase after them. He was stopped by the bald man and a group of people. Each of them was like a pack of wolves, staring at Tang Zheng with glowing eyes. "Want to escape? No way. Close the door." How would they find the ancient tomb then? Seeing that Tang Zheng was silent, the boss was afraid that he would vent his anger on him, so he reminded him, "So you're looking for those people. They're not easy to deal with." "Huh." Tang Zheng moved his head and asked, "Do you know them?" "No, I don't." The boss hurriedly shook his head, "But they used to live here. I can tell they're not easy to deal with. Also, they have a smell on them." "Smell? What smell?" Tang Zheng asked curiously. The boss stuck out his tongue and said in surprise, "The smell of death." "Huh." Tang Zheng was suddenly curious. He could see that the yin energy on those people was very strong, but he did not smell the smell of death. Seeing that Tang Zheng was very interested, the boss wanted to make up for his mistake and said, "People in that line of work all have that smell. Normal people can't smell it, but I've been here for so many years. I've met who knows how many groups of people like this. I've long known them." "Oh, what do you think they do?" "Excavators." The boss smiled slyly. Tombstone was also a tomb robber. This boss really had some experience. "Then do you know where they went? If you can tell me, then I'll let you go. Otherwise, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair. Yes. The boss was convinced. I'll tell you. They went to Qinling. Qinling? Yes, there are many ancient tombs there. It's simply a paradise for these people. Who knows how many people go there every year? Moreover, many people have poured out treasures from there. Professor Chi's eyes lit up when he heard the two words Qinling. He slapped his head and said, "Why didn't we think that they went in that direction? It must be Qinling. Since they said there's a huge ancient tomb, then Qinling fits the description." Tang Zheng knew little about this. Seeing that Professor Chi was so certain, he believed him. He asked the boss with a cold face, "Qinling is so big. Do you know where they went?" The boss said with a bitter face, "How would I know? If I had the ability, I'd be excavating too." "You still want to excavate?" Tang Zheng was furious. The boss knew that things were not going well. He cried out in panic, "I don't dare! I don't dare!" He paused for a moment, then added, "But recently, there have been a few groups of people going there. In the past, there weren't so many people at this time. They must have found something. You'll definitely find some clues if you go there." Tang Jing and Professor Chi looked at each other. Professor Chi nodded, apparently agreeing with this person's point of view. Seeing this, the boss looked at Tang Zheng expectantly. Tang Zheng threw him to the ground and fiercely said, "I'm warning you. If you dare to do this kind of thing in the future, your end will be your end." As soon as he finished speaking, the boss saw a ray of light shoot up into the sky and land on top of the hotel. Then, everything returned to normal. He saw the two people get into a car and drive away. The boss patted his chest with lingering fear and spat. He curled his lips and said, "You're scaring me? Do you think I'm scared? You're a dragon crossing the river, but there are always small shrimps. If I don't trick them, they'll have nothing to eat." The last word turned into a scream, but it was quickly drowned out by a loud rumbling sound. The scream came to an abrupt end. He stared with a pair of dead fish eyes at everything in front of him. His mind was blank, and his whole body was trembling. It was as if there were countless swords hanging over his head. The hotel collapsed. It was a mess. The group of big men were crying and screaming as they struggled to climb out of the ruins. Since they had a destination, Tang Jing and Professor Chi were not in a hurry. In order to save time, the two did not look for another hotel to stay. Instead, they drove straight to Qinling. Qinling was a huge mountain range that stretched from east to west in the middle of Huaxia. It was like a huge dragon lying on the earth of Huaxia. It was also known as the Dragon Vein of Huaxia civilization. Along the way, Professor Chi tirelessly filled Tang Jing in on the knowledge of the Qinling Mountains. There had always been many ancient and great tombs in Qinling. However, due to the restrictions of the terrain, the mountains were too steep. There were also many unknown ancient tombs buried here. This caused the tomb robbers to run rampant. They even used gunpowder to open the mountains and blow up the tombs, destroying countless cultural relics. Professor Chi sighed and said hatefully, "If we catch all these tomb robbers, it will definitely be a great merit for the inheritance of Huaxia culture." Tang Zheng did not comment. This was a whimsical idea. Human nature sought benefits and avoided harm. If there was profit, there would definitely be people who lost their humanity and took risks. After more than a day of trekking, the undulating mountains gradually appeared in their sight. This mountain range was not as dangerous as Mount Hua, but it had another kind of charm. The undulating mountains were more shocking than the hundreds of thousands of mountains in southern Yunnan. Professor Chi got out of the car, put his hands on his waist, and pointed at the mountains in the distance. He said, "Look, this is the Dragon Vein of Huaxia. It's so beautiful." "Professor Chi, is there any basis for the Dragon Vein?" Tang Zheng asked on a whim. "This is a ruling method of the ancient kings. They deliberately increased the mystery of Qinling. How can there be dragons in this world?" "Of course, there is no Dragon Vein," Professor Chi said firmly. "Dragon?" Tang Jing immediately saw the flaw in Professor Chi's words. There were dragons in this world, so the Dragon Vein might not be a groundless rumor. What exactly was a Dragon Vein? Tang Zheng could not help but have this question in his mind. But in the end, no one could answer this question. Close to Qinling, there were many more villages, hotels, and restaurants. There were obviously more people. In recent years, the tourism industry had developed, and many explorers had come to conquer this mysterious mountain range. Tang Zheng and Professor Qi decided to find a place to stay for the night and recharge their energy, especially Professor Qi. After all, he was old. After such a long journey, although he was still very excited on the surface, it was difficult to hide the deep fatigue between his brows. Moreover, he could also use the rest time to inquire about the whereabouts of the grave robbers. The two chose a hotel that seemed to be more reliable to stay in. After eating at the restaurant next door, Tang Zheng left Professor Qi to rest in the room and walked out. However, this time, just in case, the two of them only booked a standard room. Tang Zheng could only endure Professor Qi's snoring for the time being. Strolling through the village, Tang Zheng saw that there were quite a few foreigners. The inns and restaurants were filled with quite a few foreigners. Some of them were clearly backpackers, while others made Tang Zheng frown. These people were more or less tainted with Summing energy. Although they were dressed as backpackers, how could they escape Tang Zheng's sharp eyes? He walked around the village vigilantly, but he did not find the group of grave robbers. However, he saw a few other groups of grave robbers. This was really a paradise for grave robbers, a disaster area for Huaxia civilization. After a night of silence, Tang Zheng endured Professor Qi's bombardment. Professor Qi once again regained his vigor and kept urging Tang Zheng to quickly enter the mountain. Since the group of grave robbers was not in the village, then they must be impatient to enter the mountain. If the grave robbers had arrived a step earlier, who knew how many cultural relics would have been destroyed? Chapter 726. The Qinling Mountains were not as steep as the Huashan Mountains, but they were continuous and lush. It was easy for people to lose their way. In this vast mountain, once one lost their way, it was not an exaggeration to say that they would eventually be trapped to death. The two of them had been on the road for half a day. The road under their feet changed from a main road to a winding path. In the end, there was no way to go. There were thorns and vines in front of them. If Professor Qi came alone, he would have been unable to move an inch. However, with Tang Zheng, everything became easier. The War Soul Sword was overkill. With one strike, the thorns and vines were defeated. The two of them easily shuttled through the vast mountain. They were much faster than the average person. Bang! Suddenly, a clear gunshot echoed in the mountain forest. It was particularly ear-piercing. Professor Qi shrunk his head and was shocked. He exclaimed in a low voice, "There are enemies." Tang Zheng looked up as if nothing had happened. In the distance, he saw a figure flashing in the dense forest. The gunshots did not stop. They came sporadically, making people nervous. Grave robbers? Professor Qi also looked around. He smacked his lips and asked, "Most likely. These people are really desperate. They even prepared guns." Tang Zheng sighed. "Arrogant." Professor Qi scolded fiercely. "Let's go. Anyway, we haven't found any clues. Since we met grave robbers, let's follow the clues and see if we can find them." Tang Zheng suggested. Professor Qi did not disagree. He said later, "You will make a move and teach these criminals a lesson." Tang Zheng smiled and ignored Professor Qi's scholarly attitude. After a while, the two of them passed through the layers of obstacles and approached their destination. The gunshots had stopped. Tang Zheng and Professor Qi hid in the bushes. Not far from them was a group of fierce desperados. Many of them had guns in their hands. Some of them had machetes and other weapons. There were several corpses lying on the ground. The leader of the group, a scar-faced man, kicked the people on the ground, spat and cursed. "You bunch of shrimp soldiers and crab generals dare to touch that ancient tomb. Humph, you are courting death. I will send you to see the king of hell first." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his hand and swung the knife down, leaving a bloody wound on the other party's neck. That person twitched a few times before he died. Professor Qi was so scared that he exclaimed in a low voice. He knew that something was wrong and quickly covered his mouth. However, it was too late. The enemy had already found out. The scar-faced man shouted, "Who is it?" His subordinates had already taken action and arrived in front of the bushes with their guns pointed at the two of them. "Boss, we caught two people. Stand up and don't move. If you dare to move, I'll shoot you to death," The grave robber roared fiercely. Tang Zhang cast a comforting look at the frightened Professor Qi. The two of them slowly stood up. The scar-faced man walked over and stared fiercely at the two of them. His small eyes rolled around, and the machete in his hand was pointed at the two of them. He asked, "Who are you?" Professor Qi wanted to speak, but he was interrupted by Tang Zhang. "We are tourists. We heard that the scenery in Qinling Mountain is beautiful, so we came to take a look." Tang Zhang had already carefully scanned this group of people. He did not find the grave robbers he was looking for. This meant that they were not in the same group. However, the ancient tomb that the scar-faced man had mentioned had aroused Tang Zhang's interest. Could it be that this group of grave robbers had also come for that ancient tomb? He was going to wait and see. He wanted to get some information from the other party. Seeing that Tang Zhang was dignified and neither servile nor overbearing, the scar-faced man laughed fiercely. "Boy, don't think that I am a fool. You want to fool us with such a clumsy lie? Humph, you are daydreaming." Tang Zhang did not care. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Oh, then what are you going to do?" "What am I going to do? Humph, you saw what we did just now. Of course, I am going to send you to see the King of Hell," the scar-faced man said murderously. Tang Zhang was unmoved. He said, "I have seen the King of Hell a long time ago. I don't want to see him today." When he fought with the King of Hell in the ghost realm, he was no stranger to him. When the others heard this, they laughed sarcastically. "This boy is scared silly. Boss, just kill him. We still have business to do." Tang Zhang turned a deaf ear to them and asked, "Where is the ancient tomb that you were talking about?" F***CK, I am the one asking you. You dare to ask me? Damn, are you not afraid of death? Then I will fulfill your wish. The scar-faced man waved his machete. Tang Zhang frowned. This group of people was not cooperating. It seemed that they were going to use force. Bang, 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 however. A series of fierce gunshots interrupted his thoughts. The scar-faced man was shot between his eyebrows. Blood flowed out. His eyes were wide open as he fell to the ground with grievances. The others were beaten up by this sudden attack. However, in the end, they could not escape the scythe of death. They fell to the ground one after another. On the contrary, Tang Zhang and Professor Qi stood in place unscathed. Tang Zhang's expression was calm. Professor Qi looked at so many dead people. He was already pale with fright. "Professor Qi, I am here. Don't be afraid." Tang Zhang comforted him softly. Professor Qi heard this, and his trembling body slightly stopped. "Who is it this time?" Professor Qi asked with trepidation. "They will know when they come out," Tang Zhang said indifferently. In this kind of rain of bullets, it was not difficult for him to escape. However, he did not want to reveal his strength immediately. Moreover, this group of people who suddenly attacked were stronger. He wanted to see who they were. Rustling footsteps sounded in the woods. More than 10 people walked out. Tang Zhang's pupils suddenly shrank. He was secretly delighted. His target had appeared. He found the few grave robbers he had been following in the crowd. However, these people were obviously not the leader. One of them, an old man in his 50s with a goatee, caught Tang Zhang's attention. This was because he was too different from the others. Everyone else had a strong yin qi, but he was no different from an ordinary person. There was no yin qi around him at all. However, the occasional fierce light in his eyes still made Tang Zhang judge that this person was not an ordinary person. As the saying goes, a dog that bites does not bark. This old man was the dog that bites. He was much more powerful than the other people who looked fierce. This person seems to be the leader of the grave robbers. However, there is no yin qi on him. How can a person who has been drilling into graves for many years not be surrounded by yin qi? Could this old man have a way to resolve it? It was extremely unusual to be able to resolve the yin qi. Tang Zhang stopped underestimating him. The grave robbers surrounded them. More than 10 guns were aimed at the two of them. One of the grave robbers whispered a few words in the old man's ear. The old man looked surprised. His gaze went past Tang Zhang and circled around Professor Qi. Tang Zhang looked at him curiously. The person who whispered to the others in the inn was also the grave robber just now. Could it be that he had found some clues? The old man walked over and looked at Professor Qi with burning eyes. The famous Professor Qi Shaowen has graced us with your presence. What a surprise. Ah, Professor Qi let out a cry of surprise. The other party had actually seen through his identity. This was too unexpected. Tang Zheng suddenly understood. No wonder the grave robbers in the inn had escaped. It turned out that one of them had seen through Professor Qi's identity. Professor Qi was a titan in the archaeological world. It was not strange that the grave robbers could recognize him. Because of Professor Qi's prominent identity, the grave robbers must have thought that he was an official. They thought that the police had targeted them, so they ran away without stopping. Seeing Professor Qi so surprised, the old man looked around and shouted, "Police friends, you want to catch me, Wu Laoer? Then please show yourself. How can you hide so sneakily?" There was no response from the dense forest. Wu Laoer frowned and said, "Could it be that you are showing yourself because there is going to be blood?" Professor Qi is a titan in the ancient examination world. If anything happens to him, you will not be able to bear the consequences. There was still no response. Professor Qi shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about? Where did the police come from?" Wu Laoer stroked his goatee. His eyes flashed as he said, "So you are saying that you are acting alone? How am I acting alone? There are two of us." Professor Qi said angrily. Wu Laoer glanced at Tang Zheng and said, "Is bringing a student that useful?" It was clear that he thought that Tang Zheng was an ordinary student. In fact, when Tang Zheng was quiet, he really had a scholarly aura. It was not surprising that Wu Laoer misjudged him. Professor Qi said with a red face, "What's wrong with two people? Facing a group of grave robbers like you, two people are enough." Ha ha ha. The group of people laughed without restraint. They looked at Professor Qi as if they were looking at an idiot. Tang Zheng had been watching coldly from the side. This Wu Laoer was not simple. He was waiting to catch this group of people in one fell swoop and then ask about the whereabouts of the ancient tomb. "Professor Qi, you have followed us all the way. You must have heard the news, right? Hee, you've come just in time. This time, even the heavens are helping me. Last time, I wasn't able to enter the center of the ancient tomb. This time, with you and our ample preparations, we will definitely succeed." Second Elder Wu changed the topic and said mysteriously, "What do you mean?" Professor Qi asked righteously. "Of course it's to pull you in. Professor Qi, with your knowledge, after the matter is done, I will give you 10% of the profits. How about it? This is much more money than doing research." Wu Laoer said temptingly. Professor Qi flew into a rage. This was simply a humiliation to him. He did research to pass down Chinese culture. How was it for money? This group of people was tarnishing his character. He was about to scold them when Tang Zheng grabbed his hand and said, "Professor Qi, 10% of the profits is not a small amount. Aren't we lacking research funds? Won't this solve our problem?" As he said this, he secretly winked at Professor Qi. "Haha, your student is a smart person. A wise man submits to circumstances. In this society, who can't live with money?" Wu Laoer said with praise. Professor Qi was not an idiot. After seeing this, he immediately understood that Tang Zheng wanted to pretend to join them and then follow them into the ancient tomb. Professor Qi was not a pedantic person. Moreover, with Tang Zheng accompanying him, he was not afraid. He took a deep breath and said as if he had no choice, "All right, but 10% is not enough. 20%. Chapter 727. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. The two opposing parties had become allies, but neither of them had good intentions. They were just using each other. With the addition of the tomb robbers, Tang Jing and Wu Qi moved faster. They were no longer running around like headless flies. Wu Laoer explained the current situation to the two of them. It was unknown whether he was being kind or not. In the circle of robbers, this ancient tomb was no longer a secret. Of course, ordinary thieves did not know about it, but those with a little power knew about it. Therefore, for the sake of the wealth, many powers gathered in the Qinling Mountains. In order to monopolize the wealth, the killing had already begun. A few weaker groups of tomb robbers had already been eliminated. The big fish ate the small fish, and the small fish ate the shrimps. The law of the jungle played out incisively and vividly here. Wu Laoer's group was relatively lucky. Last time, They only entered the periphery of the ancient tomb and found a few scattered spoils of war. However, from these spoils of war, they could already determine how much wealth the true core of the ancient tomb contained. Men died for wealth, and birds died for food. This group of desperados did not hesitate to take risks for the sake of this treasure. As long as they succeeded, they could live a carefree life for the rest of their lives. After this deal, they would not have to worry about their lower body. Not many people could resist this kind of temptation. Professor Chi's eyebrows danced as he listened. If there was really such a huge ancient tomb, then the research value would be huge. Perhaps he could really get what he wanted and discover something shocking that could overturn history. Wu Lauer was very excited. He said, "Professor Chi, you have been doing research for so many years, but you haven't done any robbers, right?" "Humph, we studied ancient tombs for work." "Unlike you," Professor Chi said disdainfully. "Isn't it the same now? Whether it's work or robbers, it's all for money. Money is the #1 driving force." Wu Lauer laughed. Unknowingly, the group had already arrived in the depths of the Qinling Mountains. There were no signs of human habitation around. Occasionally, there would be wild beasts, but this group of people had guns and ammunition. Ordinary wild beasts could not do anything to them. Professor Chi looked around and asked curiously, "What is that ancient tomb like?" Wu Lauer's expression became serious when he mentioned the ancient tomb. He said, "I've been robbing for most of my life, but I've never seen such an ancient tomb." "Oh, what is it like?" Professor Chi asked. Wu Lauer closed his eyes as if he was reminiscing. After a while, he said, "I didn't see the whole picture of the ancient tomb. Just the tip of the iceberg shocked me. It was unheard of and unseen. It was a miracle in human history." After hearing this, Professor Chi and Tang Zheng looked at each other with joy in their eyes. It was the right decision to come here. Professor Chi impatiently urged, "Can you describe it in detail?" Wu Lauer smiled bitterly. "I can't find the right words. Words can't describe or express it." Professor Chi and Tang Zheng were more convinced when they saw that the other party was serious and did not seem to be lying. They looked forward to seeing the true appearance of the ancient tomb. "Was this tomb recently discovered?" Professor Chi asked. He knew that many ancient tombs had been discovered by grave robbers a long time ago. However, due to the conditions at that time, they couldn't enter the ancient tombs. They had to wait for the right time to enter the ancient tombs. Therefore, Professor Chi wanted to know the ins and outs of this ancient tomb. Of course, it's newly discovered. In fact, it's a coincidence. In the past, this area was trampled flat by our brothers. Many ancient tombs, big and small, were found, but no one has ever found such a large ancient tomb. Seeing Wu Lauer's excited expression, Professor Chi quickly asked, "How did you find it this time?" "Oh, someone accidentally found a treasure, so they opened this ancient tomb," Wu Lauer said mysteriously. "What treasure?" "I don't know the details. Anyway, when that group of people was fighting in Dianan, they accidentally found a natural phenomenon. A ray of light crossed the sky, and then they followed it and found a treasure. This ancient tomb was drawn out by that treasure." Wu Lauer sighed. "Why didn't I have such good luck? If I had discovered this kind of secret, I definitely wouldn't have leaked the news." That group of people didn't have a tight mouth and leaked the news, so everyone naturally swarmed over. Everyone wanted to take a bite and share a piece of the pie. Professor Chi glanced at Tang Zheng. The two of them had a strange look on their faces. The matter of southern Yunnan and the natural phenomenon caused them to have endless imagination. There were too many secrets and miracles hidden in southern Yunnan. Could it be that the treasure that the group of grave robbers found came from the 100,000 mountains? Tang Zheng had once heard from the heaven monk that back then in the 10,000 huge mountains, after he fainted, the 100 transformations Star Lord broke through the restrictions of the Buzhou mountain, and the restrictions of the prehistoric heavenly tomb also collapsed. Countless magic treasurettes and even living beings turned into rays of light that filled the sky and rushed in all directions, disappearing without a trace. Could it be? The treasure that the grave robber found was one of them? He felt more and more that this was a possibility. This group of grave robbers was really lucky. He just didn't know what the treasure was, but it actually led to this ancient tomb. Immediately, Tang Zheng became more and more expectant. Everything that was related to the 100,000 mountains was not simple. He had come here by chance, so of course he had to investigate it. After climbing over the mountains, they walked further and further away. Finally, they arrived at the foot of a towering mountain and stopped. Tang Zheng raised his head and looked around. This mountain peak was thousands of meters above sea level and was obviously taller than the other mountains. Moreover, this was the eastern section of the Qinling Mountains, and if one looked from the mountain peak, they could overlook the vast North China Plain. "Have we arrived?" Professor Qi asked. Second brother Wu nodded solemnly and ordered his subordinates to start preparing. They brought a lot of equipment, big and small bags, and Tang Zheng saw that there were explosives among them. Obviously, if they encountered any obstacles, they were prepared to explode violently. They were simply insane. After tidying up his equipment, second brother Wu gave the order and set off again. This time, he clearly saw traces of people walking past. There were many broken thorny branches on both sides. Second brother Wu looked around and said coldly, "Someone beat us to it. What are you afraid of? The ancient tomb is so big, and there are so many obstacles. It's useless even if you beat us to it." The others said indifferently. Second brother Wu nodded and did not forget to remind them, "There are so many dangers in there. Keep your eyes open. Be alert. Let's eat and drink well." The crowd was in high spirits, and they rushed to the foot of the mountain. Looking at this group of greedy people, Tang Zheng's eyes flashed with a cold light. "You are happy now, but you will cry later." Although Tang Zheng was a newcomer in the archaeology field, after all, he was also a person who walked in the 100,000 mountains, a forbidden area for archaeologists and even tomb robbers. He knew that this kind of large ancient tomb seemed to be attractive, but in fact, it was full of dangers. If he was not careful, he would lose his life here. Professor Qi and Tang Zheng were escorted in the middle of the team. Wu Laosan took the lead and removed the disguise of a pile of thorny branches. A hole appeared in front of them. The hole was not big, and it was only big enough for one person to pass through. It was like a crack formed by a crack in the mountain. It was so dark that they could not see where it led to. A gust of cold air floated out of the hole. Even if it was a hot summer day, it still made people feel a biting cold. "Go in, pay attention to the surrounding environment," second brother Wu ordered seriously. When Professor Qi walked past him, he grabbed his arm and warned him coldly, "Professor Qi, when you go in, you are only one step away from the King of Hell's palace. Don't play tricks, or you will really have to report to the King of Hell's palace." Professor Qi did not say anything. He shook off his hand and entered the hole with Tang Zheng. The tomb robber's wolf-eye flashlight illuminated the inside of the cave. There were no obvious traces of excavation on the mountain wall. Instead, it seemed to be torn apart by a huge force to form this cave. Torn apart. Tang Zheng felt a chill in his heart. How much power did this require? This was a whole mountain. How could it be torn apart? He could not figure out the reason for this at the moment. He just thought that he was thinking too much. Although the cave was cold, it was well ventilated. There was no difficulty in breathing. The surroundings were dead silent. Only the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. In such a claustrophobic environment, if one's nerves were not strong enough, they would be scared silly. Fortunately, this group of people were not ordinary people. Other than Tang Zheng, it was not the first time that the others entered the ancient tomb. They were familiar with it and moved forward carefully. The road ahead seemed to have no end. They did not know how long they had walked, but they still did not stop. Tang Zheng muttered in his heart. He had already walked for more than 1,000 meters. He should have already reached the middle of the mountain. The cave was winding upwards bit by bit, not towards the ground. Could it be that the ancient tomb was in the middle of the mountain? Suddenly, a ray of light in front of them attracted Tang Zheng. He quickly looked up and his vision gradually widened. "We're here." Someone in the crowd cheered in a low voice. Everyone was excited and quickened their pace. In the blink of an eye, they had reached the end of the cave. However, there was a sudden scream in front of them. Then, screams filled the cave. "Run! Run!" The person in front pushed back fiercely. This group of people was immediately pushed back. Some people were even trampled under their feet. There was no time to suddenly change direction. It would only cause a serious trample. Tang Zheng's eyes trembled. He quickly pulled Professor Qi and protected him behind him. He pushed his palm forward and pressed it against the back of the person in front of him, preventing him from retreating. "What are you doing? You're not allowed to retreat. Get the hell back." Wu Lauer brought up the rear and walked at the back of the group. When he saw the strange movement in front of him, he hurriedly scolded loudly. His voice finally made people relax slightly. However, panic still lingered in their hearts. They had been here the last time and did not encounter any danger. How could there be danger this time? What danger was it? A brother died. A loud shout came from the front. Chapter 728. Under second brother Wu's rage, the commotion in front finally calmed down a little. Suddenly, there was a gust of wind above his head. Tang Zheng subconsciously looked up and saw that old Wu was actually climbing over everyone's heads with his two limbs. His speed was extremely fast. When second brother Wu climbed to the front was completely quiet. Only a few muffled bangs could be heard, and second brother Wu's voice was heard. "All of you, come over here." Everyone rustled out of the cave, and their eyes lit up. The few corpses on the ground were very eye-catching. They were all stabbed with arrows, and blood flowed all over the ground. Everyone's expression was a little unsightly. Dying before the start of the expedition was not a good sign. "Damn it, we didn't see the mechanism last time we came. Why is there a mechanism this time?" Second brother Wu fiercely spat and cursed. Everyone else was silent. How could they know the reason? The people walking in front could not help but recall the scene they had just seen. One arrow after another shot out from the holes in the opposite wall. It was impossible for flesh and blood to block it. Tang Zheng also clicked his tongue in wonder. The ancient people's mechanism had been baptized for so long, but it could still be triggered. He also subconsciously looked at the opposite side. Suddenly, his mind was greatly shaken. His pupils were filled with a huge object. Immediately, he was dumbfounded and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Professor Chi's reaction was even stronger than his. He directly screamed and rushed over without caring about his own safety. The others were attracted by the reactions of these two people. The crowd sneered, but they did not remember that their reactions were almost the same when they first saw this scene. Why was there such a big reaction? It was because they saw the true appearance of the ancient tomb. Looking up, the ancient tomb made of blue bricks could not be seen at a glance. It was as if it towered into the clouds. The top of the tomb could not be seen clearly. Moreover, as far as the eye could see, there was no end to it. This ancient tomb seemed to be boundless, as vast as the sea and as majestic as the mountains. How could there be such a strange ancient tomb in the mountains of Qinling? How did the people in the past build it? Question marks came one after another, drilling into Tang Zheng's mind one after another, making him unable to find an answer. Professor Chi was already lying on top of the ancient tomb. He wished he could grow 1,000 pairs of hands and touch every inch of the ancient tomb. The blue bricks seemed to make his heart beat faster than a woman's skin. The grave robber sneered at Professor Chi and said, "Professors are indeed stupid. It's not worth anything. What's there to touch? It's not like it's a woman." Second brother Wu's face was livid. He pulled Professor Chi aside and said, "What are you talking about? Hurry up and find a way to enter the tomb." In fact, this was only the periphery of the tomb. One had to break through the bricks to truly enter the tomb. Professor Chi slowly came back to his senses. His eyes became serious and dignified as he asked, "Where did you steal the bronze mask from?" "Bronze mask?" Wu Lauer was stunned for a moment before he sneered and said, "So it was because of this that you were lured all the way here from the capital." After pausing for a moment, second brother Wu pointed at the surrounding walls and said, "Look, it's the pit on the wall. Do you see it? The mask is embedded in it. I was almost scared to death at first glance." Tang Zheng and Professor Chi followed his finger and looked over. Sure enough, there were many pits on the surrounding walls. The size of the pits matched the bronze mask. Tang Zheng's face sank and asked, "There are so many pits. There must be a lot of bronze masks. Where are the others?" Second brother Wu spread out his hands and said, "How would I know? They must have been sold. There were a lot of people who came in. Although they didn't enter the tomb, they looted all the good things here." "What a sin." Professor Chi cried out loudly. He wanted to hit the ground with his head. The grave robbers' behavior was heartbreaking. If they didn't destroy the bronze masks, they would definitely be able to research a lot of new things. Tang Zheng felt a little regretful. If there were so many masks, he could absorb more spiritual energy to increase his cultivation. Second brother Wu's face turned red and he said angrily, Professor Chi, don't blame me for being rude if you continue to be noisy. Professor Chi snorted and glared fiercely at Wu Lauer. It was as if he was looking at a mortal enemy. Second brother Wu pretended not to see and said, Think of a way to enter the tomb. What about the tomb door? Professor Chi asked. Second brother Wu shook his head. It's useless. The tomb door is a 10,000-pound boulder. I've never seen such a huge boulder. It's impossible to push it open with human strength. Professor Chi curled his lips and said disdainfully, How did the ancients succeed? Humph, it's not that human strength can't do it. It's just that some people are too stupid. Second brother Wu was insulted and glared angrily. However, he forced himself not to flare up. He still had to rely on Professor Chi. Tang Zheng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Sometimes, Professor Chi was stubborn to the point of being cute. Facing this group of fiendish grave robbers, he was like a warrior. Lead the way to the tomb door, Professor Chi said unquestionably. Second brother Wu was helpless and could only lead the two of them along the tomb for a long distance before finally arriving at the tomb door. The tomb door was about 10 meters tall, and it was really a solid stone door. It was unknown how the ancient people built such a giant, but compared to this miraculous ancient tomb, this tomb door was nothing. Second brother Wu looked up at the tomb door and smacked his lips. We can't enter from here. We brought enough gunpowder so we can definitely blow open the tomb. Scram to the side. Professor Chi's temper flared up. He completely ignored the other party and began to fumble around the tomb door. Second brother Wu was about to explode. He gritted his teeth and said, Professor Chi, I'll give you 10 minutes. If you can't do anything, whether you agree or not, I can only blow it up. Professor Chi snorted and didn't comment. He continued to work as he pleased. When Tang Zheng saw this, he also went over and touched it. It was cold to the touch as if he was touching ice. This wasn't because of the special material of the bricks, but because this place had accumulated too much Qi over the years. Seeing Professor Chi so serious and persistent, Tang Zheng didn't want to disturb him. Thus, Tang Zheng began to study the tomb door again. He placed his hands on it and silently circulated his energy. Whoosh! He took a deep breath and released his true Qi, but the tomb door didn't move. Tang Zheng was secretly speechless. This really wasn't something that could be done by human strength. Time passed minute by minute. The tomb robbers were like ants on a hot pan. They walked in circles and looked at Professor Chi with burning eyes. Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud sound. The huge echo reverberated in the enclosed space. It was deafening and almost made people fall to the ground. What's wrong? The tomb robbers shouted in panic. Professor Chi roared angrily, Didn't I forbid you to use explosives? Second brother Wu said with grievance, It's not us. Who else? Wu Lauer shook his head and said, We don't know how many people are still inside. His face became tense as he said this. We don't know how many people have already entered. We can't wait any longer. We have to blast open a hole and rush in. Otherwise, if we are too late, not even dregs will be left. The others agreed. They didn't pay attention to Professor Chi at all. They were busy preparing to set up the explosives. Professor Chi was so angry that his face turned red. He almost stomped his feet. A bunch of idiots. His lips kept trembling, but his hands didn't stop moving. Suddenly, his face turned cold. His hands stopped, and he pushed the bricks one by one. It was as if he didn't have a pattern. He casually pushed a brick. After a while, his hands had pushed no less than 10 bricks. Tang Zheng was slightly surprised. He didn't find any clues. Could it be that Professor Chi found something? Second brother Wu also stared at Professor Chi. He saw Professor Chi press the last brick. Click, click, click. The sound of gears turning clearly came from the ancient tomb. All the tomb robbers subconsciously stopped what they were doing. Second brother Wu's face was filled with ecstasy. He was so smart. It was so useful to bring Professor Chi along. He was much better than a tomb robber like himself. Professor Chi turned his head and glanced at the tomb robbers with disdain. What do you mean by human strength? What is this? As soon as he finished speaking, the huge tomb door actually rose bit by bit. This was definitely a slap in the face. The tomb robbers' faces turned red. They couldn't refute it at all. At this moment, Professor Chi was simply shining. He was the absolute focus of the crowd. Tang Zheng took a deep breath. He couldn't help but silently praise Professor Chi. Even he couldn't find any clues, but Professor Chi found the pattern and easily broke through the tomb door. This required a huge amount of knowledge and enough intelligence to do it. He couldn't help but admire Professor Chi for this. The title of Professor Chi wasn't fishing for fame. He deserved it. The tomb door slowly rose. Everyone was so excited that they couldn't control themselves. They rubbed their fists and wanted to rush in. Second Brother Wu hurriedly scolded, "Do you want to die? Have you forgotten the rules?" Everyone was silent. They remembered their companions who had died tragically. This wasn't an ordinary ancient tomb. It was an ancient tomb filled with danger. They hurriedly retreated. A gust of cold wind swept out from the tomb door, causing their teeth to chatter. Such a strong yin qi. Tang Zheng was secretly speechless. This was more serious than he had expected. If a place had too much yin qi, it was definitely not a good thing. Back then, ordinary Balance's ominous land had too much yin qi and evil spirits frequently appeared. This was originally an ancient tomb. Would there be those dirty things? However, he was still bold. He thought to himself that even if there were those things, he could still deal with them. As for these grave robbers, humph, they had only themselves to blame for seeking their own deaths. He did not have the leisure to save them. After a while, Second Brother Wu said, "Let's go. Be careful. There must be a lot of F***king traps here. We have to be careful. Otherwise, no one will benefit." The few of them walked through the tomb door one after another. With a loud bang, the tomb door fell. There was no way out. Chapter 729. It was not dark in the ancient tomb because there were luminous pearls embedded in the ceiling, emitting a faint light. The eyes of the grave robbers lit up, and they kept swallowing their saliva. There were so many luminous pearls. How much would they be worth if they dug them all out? However, no one dug because it was too high. The ceiling was about 5 meters high, and there were smooth stone walls on both sides. They could not climb up at all, and they could only sigh. Useless things. How much is this worth? The big part is inside. Wu Lao slapped the head of one of his men and scolded him. The man was slapped into the wall, making a crisp sound. The person walking at the front suddenly let out a scream, and he disappeared because he stepped on air and fell into the darkness. "Watch your step," Wu Lao shouted. The crowd immediately jumped up and down because the stones under their feet were moving. Some stones disappeared into thin air, and they were caught off guard. Tang Zheng saw the stone under Professor Chi's feet disappear, and he quickly grabbed his hand. They jumped into the air and moved to another stone slab. However, that stone slab seemed to have lost its support and fell down. Tang Zheng skimmed the surface and pulled Professor Chi through the stone slabs. However, the other grave robbers were not so lucky. After a while, more than half of them fell down. The others gathered around Wu Lao, and they all looked as if they had lost their parents. Wu Lao's face was ashen. He looked at Tang Jing and Professor Chi from afar with a surprised expression. Obviously, he also knew that he had misjudged them. However, the situation in front of him did not allow him to be distracted. He jumped up and down, and his toes moved quickly. He narrowly avoided stepping on air. The other grave robbers did not have his skills. They screamed and fell into the darkness. There was no chance of survival. Bang! Wu Lao's feet landed firmly on the ground. He looked back and saw that the 10-meter distance he was standing on had completely collapsed, leaving only a dark space. It was like a bloody mouth that swallowed people. It made him shudder. It was too late for regrets. He should not have slapped his subordinate just now. The other party must have hit the mechanism on the wall, causing the entire team to be wiped out. His intestines were about to turn green with regret. He took a few deep breaths to suppress the unwillingness and anger in his heart, But when he looked up and saw Tang Zheng's face, his anger surged again. Brat, so you were pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? Tang Zheng smiled coldly and said, Are you a tiger? You think too highly of yourself. Wu Lauer clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles cracked. He wished he could go up and beat Tang Zheng up. However, when he recalled Tang Zheng's elegant movements just now, he knew that Tang Zheng was much more powerful than him. He couldn't help but wonder if the other party's strength surpassed his. He didn't dare to cause any more trouble. This place was filled with danger. If he wasn't careful, he could be killed by the traps. It was better not to provoke the other party. Humph, good as expected. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Wu Lauer threw down these words, flicked his sleeves and left, rushing forward with large strides. Professor Qi said worriedly, Since you've already shed all pretense of cordiality, why don't you just directly capture him? Tang Zheng smiled mysteriously and said, This place is so dangerous. It's good to let him take a trip. Moreover, he doesn't even have any explosives. How can he run out of here? Professor Qi suddenly understood and laughed. Tang Zheng, why didn't I realize that you were so cunning before? Tang Zheng said with a bitter face, Didn't you teach me this? You can't be merciful to this kind of grave robber. Professor Qi nodded in agreement. Yes, you can't be merciful. I'll say something that shouldn't be said. It's better if all of these people die. Ha ha ha. Looking at his indignant appearance, Tang Zheng couldn't help but laugh. The two followed Wu Lauer, and the whole way was unobstructed. They didn't encounter any more traps. Obviously, both sides were very careful. They didn't act rashly and didn't trigger any traps. Suddenly, the sound of fighting in front of them attracted the three's attention. The three immediately stopped and looked up vigilantly. The road had already come to an end. In front of them was a huge space, like a vast hall. Why would a hall be described as vast? Because looking from afar, it really was boundless. The three simultaneously sucked in a breath of cold air. This ancient tomb was getting stranger and stranger. The sound of fighting meant that someone had already entered. Perhaps it was the people who used the explosives just now. Moreover, it wasn't just a group of people. Gunshots rang out like firecrackers. When Professor Qi heard this, he beat his chest and shouted, What a sin! Who knows how many cultural relics have been destroyed inside? This is a crime against history, a crime against the Huaxia civilization. Tang Zheng hurriedly grabbed him, afraid that he would rush in. Even he wouldn't be able to catch the rain of bullets. Wu Lauer's expression kept changing. He stretched his neck to look inside, but he couldn't see clearly. In the end, his face was ashen. Obviously, the people inside were definitely more powerful than him. It wouldn't be easy for him to gain any benefits. The gunshots gradually stopped. The winner must have been decided. Suddenly, the few people couldn't sit still. The winner had been decided, so it was time to divide the spoils. If they still didn't go in, then they wouldn't have a share. Professor Qi couldn't bear to see the tomb robbers destroy the cultural relics. He kept urging Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng also felt that they couldn't delay and rushed into the hall with Wu Lauer. Tang Zheng kept Professor Qi firmly behind him, afraid that a bullet would suddenly fly over. If anything happened to Professor Qi, then he would be guilty. After entering the hall, their field of vision suddenly opened up. Many people had already fallen on the ground. They were struggling on the verge of death, but they were mercilessly shot to death by the enemy. When they saw the three uninvited guests, the group of people turned their guns and pointed at them. They shouted, Who are you? Hey, isn't this Wu Lauer? You're really lucky. You actually didn't die. Oh, you even brought two helpers. That's too shabby. One old and one young. You don't have anyone, right? Haha. Some people in the crowd recognized Wu Lauer and began to ridicule him. Wu Lauer's face alternated between red and white. He said, Chui San, don't be so damn arrogant. Shouldn't I be arrogant? Damn it, this ancient tomb was first discovered by me. If it wasn't for the news being leaked, how could you have a chance? But so what if you came? Everything here is still mine. Don't even think about fucking touching it. Chui San unscrupulously roared. Wu Lauer curled his lips and disdainfully said, Chui San, you're too early to talk big. It's not like I don't know your ability. Your ability is not enough in front of me. Is that so? Then look at those dead people on the ground. Who's more capable than you? Chui San proudly pointed at the corpses on the ground. Second brother Wu's pupils suddenly constricted, and his mind was greatly shaken because he saw a few familiar faces among them. These people were all famous figures in the plundering world, and their strength was several levels higher than his. How could these strong people be killed by Chui San? This was not scientific, not normal. Wu Lauer's eyelids twitched and his expression changed greatly. Seeing this, Chui San wantonly laughed. Now you know how powerful I am? Wu Lauer, today is the day you die. Go to hell and watch your grandpa Chui San live a good life for the rest of his life. Tang Zheng and Professor Qi were not in the mood to listen to his bragging. Instead, they observed the hall. The hall was really big. They couldn't see the end of it at a glance. It was like a huge space. This space was far more vast than the mountain. This was too strange. Even Tang Zheng couldn't help but frown. There must be a demon behind this abnormality. This demon was too big. Looking up at the sky, the two were simultaneously shocked. Above their heads was a void. They couldn't see the end of it, but there were specks of stars in the void. It really did look like a sky. But how could there be a sky in this ancient tomb? Professor Qi could no longer explain all of this with his knowledge. This was definitely a huge discovery in the archaeological world. It would definitely shock the world. Compared to this, the pyramids were not even worth mentioning. The ancestors of Huaxia were indeed endlessly creative and intelligent. Even modern people would find it difficult to achieve this. Professor Qi was secretly speechless. Tang Zheng looked into the distance. He couldn't see the space clearly, but his intuition told him that there was something inside. Professor Qi, let's go over there, Tang Zheng said. Professor Qi's eyes lit up. Just what I wanted. The two ignored Chui San and Wu Lauer's hostility. They were about to leave when they immediately attracted Chui San's attention. Stop! Chui San flew into a rage. He waved his hand and a group of subordinates blocked the two's path. Wu Lauer, your two subordinates don't know the rules. We haven't even finished talking and they want to run. Wu Lauer meaningfully said, Is that so? Then what are you going to do? What are we going to do? Of course we'll do the same as you. We'll send them to see the king of hell. Chui San said with killing intent. He waved his hand and a group of people surrounded them. It was clear that in the eyes of this group of desperados, they didn't care about the two of them. Tang Zheng wrinkled his eyebrows. This group of people were not good people, so he decided to take care of this matter. His feet slipped, and like a loach, he slid through the crowd. Every time the others touched his body, they would be sent flying and fall to the ground, bleeding profusely. Although Wu Lauer already knew that Tang Zheng's skills weren't ordinary, he didn't think that he would be this powerful. He was able to make a name for himself in this field mainly because of his master's small skills. The method to dissolve the Yin Qi was also a method that his ancestor had found with great difficulty. It wasn't that he was very powerful. Chui San was frightened by this scene. In the blink of an eye, he was the only one left standing. His face was ashen as he shouted, I'm going to kill you. He waved his hands in the air, and a scroll rose into the air and slowly unfurled. Tang Zheng's eyebrows wrinkled as he stared fixedly at this scene. Chapter 730. The scroll slowly unfolded and a mysterious force rippled out. A ray of light shot up into the sky. With a point of Chui San's finger, the light fell on Tang Zheng's body. Tang Zheng's body tensed up and he turned pale with fright. A strong suction force was firmly attracting him. What's going on? He hurriedly looked at the scroll above his head. It had been completely unfolded. The vast mountains and rivers in the scroll were vivid and lifelike, as if they were real. A whirlpool appeared in the center of the scroll, firmly attracting Tang Zheng, trying to suck him in. I must not be sucked in. Although Tang Zheng did not understand what the scroll was, he knew that being sucked in was not a good thing. He hurriedly circulated his qi, circulating it through his 8 extraordinary meridians to resist the suction force. Chui San was shocked to see that his tried and tested killing move did not have an immediate effect. A ruthless look flashed across his face as he said, "Your third master wants to see how you can resist my mountain river map of the gods of earth and Vale." As soon as his voice fell, the suction force suddenly increased. Tang Jing knew that something was wrong. He roared and pushed his palms above his head. Whoosh! A strong suction force also formed in his palms. Sky swallowing technique. 8. Since the mountain river map was a gravitational force, then he would use gravity against gravity. As expected, once the sky swallowing technique was used, the pressure suddenly decreased. War Spirit followed closely behind. With a slash of the sword, the turbulent airflow scattered in all directions. Chui San could not stand steadily and sat on the ground. Without Chui San's support, the mountain river map floated down. Tang Jing jumped and caught it. "Don't touch my treasure. Quickly return it to me." Seeing this, Chui San hysterically shouted and wanted to circulate his qi. However, how could Tang Jing give him the chance? A cold light flashed in his hand and War Spirit flew out, piercing through Chui San's chest. Oh my God! Wu Lauer, who had been sitting on the mountain and watching the tigers fight, was so scared that he ran away. This scene was completely beyond his understanding, and his heart was instantly filled with fear. Tang Jing glanced at Wu Lauer, who had already rushed into the darkness ahead. He didn't immediately chase after him. Instead, he carefully observed the scroll in his hand. The scroll was about half a meter long, and various mountains and rivers were drawn on it. Moreover, most of them were not mountains and rivers in Huaxia's reality, which made Tang Jing quite surprised. There was a mysterious fluctuation of spiritual energy on the painting. Could it be that the treasure Chui San obtained from the Grand Myriad Mountains was this stately painting? Did he find this ancient tomb just by relying on this map? Professor Qi also came over and stared straight at the painting. His eyes lit up as he looked at the bright stars in the sky. I've never seen such a magical painting. Look at the river, the water is actually flowing. And that forest, the branches and leaves are swaying as if they're being blown by the wind. Professor Qi was already dumbfounded as he cried out in surprise. Tang Jing fixed his eyes on it. Sure enough, he didn't notice this clue just now. Every blade of grass and every tree in the stately painting seemed to have vitality. This kind of thing had never been seen or heard of before. This is a miracle. Professor Qi smacked his lips, and his jaw almost fell to the ground. Professor Qi couldn't help but rub the painting, but there was nothing. The attraction just now had already disappeared without a trace. Tang Jing, can you see the secret inside? Tang Jing shook his head. He was experienced and knowledgeable, but he had never seen such a magical painting. Professor Qi, let's go back and study it carefully. Let's catch up first. There must be more things over there, Tang Jing reminded. Professor Qi's eyes lit up, and he nodded in agreement. Yes, that Wu Lauer has already escaped. We must catch up to prevent him from destroying more cultural relics. Tang Jing casually threw the stately painting into the Sumeru bag. Huh! Suddenly, he exclaimed. The stately painting didn't react at all. What's the matter? Why can't it be put into the Sumeru bag? Tang Jing had never encountered such a situation before. Even a colossal figure like the venerable ideologist could be put into the Sumeru bag, but this small painting couldn't be put in. This was too strange. After hearing Tang Jing's explanation, Professor Qi was also dumbfounded. He shook his head and said, "This is a matter for you cultivators. I really don't know the reason." Since it couldn't be put in the bag, Tang Jing simply took out a backpack and carried it close to his body. Then, he set off with Professor Qi. The stars above their heads shone, but the light was very dim. The two of them were prepared and took out their flashlights. Under their feet was a flat road paved with green bricks. It was like a huge square. As far as the flashlight's light could reach, it was still an empty square. It was barren, and there was nothing in it. It couldn't illuminate the sides at all. How big is this place? Professor Qi couldn't help but exclaim. Tang Jing said solemnly, "There are too many strange things in this ancient tomb." Professor Qi was incomparably excited. Strange things mean that it's magical. That's why there are so many new discoveries. After walking for a long time, they still didn't see Wu Lauer's figure. Just as the two of them were about to lose hope, a huge phantom vaguely appeared in the distance. This phantom was tall and large, and its outline was very frightening. However, it was too far away to see clearly. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. They finally found the building. With a target, the two of them were energized and quickly ran toward the target. Finally, everything in front of them became clear. The colossal figure also revealed its true appearance. The two of them were startled and subconsciously stopped in their tracks. The two of them looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with shock. This was actually a huge altar. How big was it? It was as big as 10 main courts. Painting. The two of them immediately remembered the painting that the grave robber sold to Old Wei. There was such an altar in it. Moreover, it looked like it was the same one. Could that painting be describing the scene in front of them? The two of them quickly remembered another scene in the painting. A group of people were building a magnificent palace. In front of the altar, there was a dense crowd wearing bronze masks. The two of them immediately raised their flashlights and shone it over. The altar was too big. They couldn't see clearly what was behind the altar. They couldn't see if there was a crowd of bronze masks behind the altar. That painting must be a documentary of the construction of this ancient tomb. It was just stolen by the grave robbers. Professor Qi concluded. Tang Zheng nodded. His thoughts were similar to Professor Qi's. Doesn't that mean there's a palace behind it? Tang Zheng pointed at the back of the altar and said. Professor Qi muttered. It's possible. Tang Zheng sucked in a breath of cold air. The painting clearly depicted the appearance of the palace, which towered into the clouds as if it was on par with the heavens. How magnificent it must be! Tang Zheng, take me to the altar. Professor Qi's eyes lit up with excitement. He looked up and stared at the altar. Go up? Yes, this is the place where the ancients worshipped. There are many secrets that can be found in this kind of place. We can't miss it. We have to see it first. Moreover, there were so many traps at the entrance of this ancient tomb. However, it was safe and there was no danger. This is very unusual. Therefore, we can't take the risk. We have to figure out the situation first. Professor Qi said seriously. Seeing that he was so cautious, Tang Zheng thought for a while and agreed. Then hold on tight. Tang Zheng lifted Professor Qi's shoulder, and with a tap of his toes, he flew up to the top of the altar. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Professor Qi heard the sound of the wind. He looked up subconsciously and found that they were getting higher and higher. His heart beat faster. He took a deep breath and drove away his fear. He looked up excitedly. The top of the altar was close at hand. Bang! Tang Zheng's feet landed on the ground. The dull sound of his footsteps was very obvious in the empty space. It gave the two people a fright. Tang Zheng put down Professor Qi and took a deep breath. He looked up and realized more clearly that the altar was extraordinary. What shocked him even more was that the altar seemed to be a hole. It was made of a huge stone. With Tang Zheng's knowledge, he had never heard of such a huge and complete stone in the world. Hiss. He took a deep breath and circulated his genuine qi to guard against the unexpected. Professor Qi was already squatting on the ground and studying it. There were many complicated patterns on the ground. They were not very beautiful. They were very thick and curved, giving people a strange feeling. Tang Zheng had seen the square of the witch tribe in the 100,000 mountains. That square contained divine power. Not only did it have the 4 symbols venerables, but it also had the heaven and earth mystic stone. This altar was probably as magical as the mystic stone. He did not dare to be careless. Professor Qi lowered his eyebrows and did not say anything. His thick eyebrows were deeply furrowed. He followed the patterns on the altar and ran forward. After a while, he stopped and continued to run. Tang Zheng looked at him suspiciously and did not leave his side. He did not know what he had discovered. Suddenly, Tang Zheng stopped and grabbed Professor Qi, who wanted to rush forward again. Professor Qi was caught and shouted in dissatisfaction. Tang Zheng, what are you doing? Let go of me. Tang Zheng pulled Professor Qi behind him and cautiously said, Professor Qi, don't be impatient. Hearing this, Professor Qi finally calmed down and asked, What's wrong? There's someone. Tang Zheng said, Someone? Professor Qi was shocked. How could there be other people in this place? Could it be Old Wu? Over Tang Zheng's shoulder, Professor Chi finally saw that person. It was definitely not Old Wu. Although it was only a back view, it gave people a completely different feeling. Who is it? Professor Chi swallowed his saliva and asked. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, "Let's go up and take a look." Since he had met someone, he couldn't just turn a blind eye. The two of them walked towards the opposite side. That person kept looking into the distance like a piece of wood, not reacting at all. But when the two of them were still more than 10 steps away, that person moved. He suddenly turned around and his eyes were as sharp as a peerless treasure sword, almost blinding people. He was very particular about his clothes, and his outfit was exquisite. His clothes were tailored very well, and even his nails were cut very neatly, just like a woman. But he was a man, a very exquisite man. If a man used the word exquisite, then he must be extraordinary. Chapter 731. Tang Zheng stared at this person, and the other party looked at him with interest. Obviously, this person was not an ancient person, but a modern person. His modern outfit was even more fashionable than Tang Zheng's. "Who are you?" Tang Zheng asked cautiously. This person was definitely not an ordinary grave robber. Those grave robbers were not even worthy of carrying his shoes. Even Tang Zheng did not dare to underestimate the aura that was faintly emitted. "Tang Zheng." The other party did not answer, but instead called out Tang Zheng's name. Tang Zheng and Professor Chi were both shocked. Tang Zheng was sure that he had never seen this person before. The other party left a deep impression on him. Even if he had only seen him once, he would never forget. "You know me?" The other party laughed, and his smile was even a bit evil. "Of course I know you. Your great name is like thunder to my ears." "We have never met." "Yes, but I have seen your picture," the other party said bluntly. "I really did not expect to see you here. Allow me to introduce myself first, otherwise it would be rude." The other party was polite, like a noble gentleman. "This humble one is Jade-Faced Flying Dragon." His voice was raised a few notches, and his head was raised high as he said proudly, "Jade-Faced Flying Dragon?" Tang Zheng frowned. He had never heard of this person in the Jianghu. Where did this expert come from? "I think you have never heard of me, but you will remember my name in the future," Jade-Faced Flying Dragon said confidently. "Why?" "Because I want to kill you." Jade-Faced Flying Dragon deliberately dragged out the word kill, and a murderous aura seemed to burst out from this word. Tang Zheng's body tensed up. The other party had said that he wanted to kill him. There were only two possibilities. First, he was an idiot, and only then would he be so arrogant. Second, he was a true expert and had this confidence. Obviously, the other party did not belong to the first category. Then, he was definitely an expert, and an extraordinary one at that. He was an expert that Tang Zheng could not see through. The other party was only in his 30s, yet he had this kind of cultivation. He was definitely an outstanding person. Why was there no news of such a fierce person in the Jianghu? Seeing that Tang Zheng didn't move, Fair-Faced Flying Dragon smiled. "Very good. You can still stand here after hearing that I want to kill you." In the past, when others heard this, they would immediately run away. "Is that useful?" Tang Zheng asked. Fair-Faced Flying Dragon praised. "You are very smart. You know that running away is futile. It only adds to the fun of the game. It doesn't have much of an effect because they all died in the end." Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched as he sneered. "Is that so? I'm not like those people. Are you so confident that you can kill me?" "Of course," Fair-Faced Flying Dragon said without hesitation. "I never thought that I would meet you here. This can be considered fate. Before I kill you, I'll let you take a look at the Heavenly Palace." "Heavenly Palace?" Tang Zheng and Professor Chi cried out in surprise. "Oh, it seems that you don't understand the purpose of this trip, nor do you understand the truth of this ancient tomb." Fair-Faced Flying Dragon raised an eyebrow and said with a smile that was not a smile, "Could it be that you understand? I know a thing or two." Fair-Faced Flying Dragon elegantly turned around and pointed into the distance, completely unafraid of Tang Zheng's sneak attack. Of course, Tang Zheng would not sneak attack. He and Professor Chi strode forward and looked up. Immediately, the two's attention was firmly attracted. In the distance, There was a huge palace that towered into the sky. Wasn't this the palace in the painting? Didn't so many people work so hard to build this palace? The altar and the palace were exactly the same as in the painting. The two's breaths involuntarily quickened. Fair-faced flying dragon glanced at the two and said with a smile, "The wisdom of the ancients is truly endless. It's unimaginable and unattainable for us descendants." "This is the heavenly palace you were talking about?" Professor Chi asked with a trembling voice. He was not afraid, but excited. There had never been a record or description of this building in the history of Huaxia. This meant that this discovery was unprecedented. What did this mean for him? Money? Fame? No, he did not care about any of these. He could complete the history of Huaxia and even fill in the gaps in Huaxia's history. This was what tickled his nerves the most. Fair-faced flying dragon nodded. "Yes, this is the heavenly palace. It's magnificent and beautiful." Back then, Emperor Qin was truly an emperor, a peerless hero. Not only did he build the terracotta army, he also built a heavenly palace that ordinary people do not even know about. "You're saying that Emperor Qin built this?" Professor Chi's breaths quickened as if he was about to have a heart attack. "Of course. Don't tell me that you don't know who the owner of the tomb is after entering it?" Fair-faced flying dragon asked curiously. Tang Jing and Professor Chi's cheeks turned red. They really did not know. That's true. This ancient tomb didn't even exist in historical records. How could a normal person know about it? Who knows what kind of luck those tomb raiders had? But they somehow stumbled upon this ancient tomb and allowed it to see the light of day again. Fair-faced flying dragon sighed. Tang Zheng looked at the magnificent palace as if he was looking at a mountain. This was the work of Emperor Qin. No wonder it was so shocking. This emperor was truly not someone that ordinary people could hope to reach. It was even possible to imagine. His thinking was far beyond the limits of a human. As a celestial as well, Tang Zheng could not help but feel ashamed of his inferiority. He was too inferior as a celestial, let alone a godlike figure like Qiyu. Even Qin Shi Huang was someone he could not compare to. He was usually proud of his achievements, but now he realized that his achievements were simply insignificant compared to this identity. It was even a bit laughable. He could not smile at all. There was a bitter taste in his mouth. However, he also felt that it was very strange. He had just learned of Emperor Qin's identity from the five-clawed golden dragon, and now he had accidentally stumbled into his tomb. Was this the will of the heavens? The shock in Professor Chi's heart far exceeded Tang Zheng's. There were many records of this ancient emperor in history, but many of them were vague and even mysterious. It was a secret that many historians could not find out even if they scratched their heads. Back then, the appearance of the terracotta warriors had shocked the world of archaeology, the world of history, and the world. No one would have thought that it was just the tip of the iceberg. What was even more shocking was that this was a project that could not be completed by human strength. Professor Chi remembered another mystery in the world of archaeology. That was Emperor Qin's tomb. There were many different opinions, but no one had a definite conclusion. He would never have thought that his tomb would be built in the vast Qinling Mountains, hidden deep in the heart of the mountains. No wonder no one had found it after such a long time. He could not help but think of some of the famous emperors in history. In order to prevent their tombs from being raided after their death, they had used all kinds of methods and set up all kinds of traps. But compared to Emperor Qin's tomb, it was simply child's play. Professor Chi pointed at the heavenly palace and asked, "Is Emperor Qin's coffin in the heavenly palace?" Fair-faced flying dragon nodded and said, "Yes." Professor Chi was overjoyed. He grabbed Tang Zheng's hand and said, "We must go to the heavenly palace, we must." Tang Zheng nodded. He also wanted to see this celestial from thousands of years ago. He wanted to see if he could learn more about the secrets of celestials. Fair-faced flying dragon interrupted Professor Chi's beautiful dream, only to hear him say coldly, "I'm afraid you don't have this life." However, to be buried here with Qin Shi Huang, to be disguised as an emperor for all eternity, this is a great honor. Tang Zheng stepped forward to protect Professor Chi and said, "You really can't wait to kill me? The longer we delay, the sooner we kill you, the better. In this world, there are too many idiots who don't make a move, and in the end, they will miss the opportunity." fair-faced flying dragon, am not that stupid. Tang Zheng's pupils shrank. Professor Qi was indeed a difficult person to deal with. Professor Qi, when we fight later, if I can't defeat him, I will find an opportunity to put you down. Then, you can't turn back. Immediately run back the way you came, and then leave this tomb. Remember, don't look back. Tang Zheng whispered. Professor Qi's face changed drastically. He looked at the heavenly palace and said reluctantly, "Leave this place? Yes, your life is more important than anything else. Where there is life, there is hope." Tang Zheng tried his best to persuade him. He was afraid that Professor Qi would lose his temper. Professor Qi hesitated for a moment and then sighed. Okay. Tang Zheng walked forward in large strides. When he was a few meters away from fair-faced Flying Dragon, he looked at him with shining eyes. Fair-faced Flying Dragon smiled and said, "Pay attention. My attack has begun." Tang Zheng had already paid 120% attention. Hearing these words, War Soul was already firmly grasped in his hand. The sporadic mottled light was unable to cover up the destructive light of War Soul. On the altar, there were only a few flashlights on the ground. They were not very bright, but for these two experts, it was enough to determine victory and defeat. It was enough to decide life and death. Although he had already paid enough attention, the moment fair-faced Flying Dragon's voice fell, Tang Zheng felt a despicable aura shoot towards him. He had not seen clearly what it was. He quickly raised War Soul. Ding! With a crisp sound, War Soul trembled non-stop. Tang Zheng's feet slipped, and he almost fell back. War Soul buzzed non-stop, and Tang Zheng's arm went numb. It was just a single strike. Moreover, he had not seen clearly how powerful it was. This caused him to be extremely frightened. He quickly looked up and saw fair-faced Flying Dragon's finger in the air. That despicable aura shot towards him again. Tang Zheng did not sit still and wait for death. He leapt into the air and swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. War Soul slashed through the air. A cold light blossomed on War Soul's blade, creating dazzling sparks. Tang Zheng finally saw clearly that his opponent's weapon was a throwing knife. Chapter 732. Fair-faced Flying Dragon saw that his flying dagger missed, but his expression did not change. He said not bad as he quickly waved his arm. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A series of cold lights swept through the dark space. Tang Zheng felt a flash in front of his eyes, and the flying dagger was already flying towards him like a string of pearls, full of killing intent. Ding, ding, ding. The flying immortals from Outer Heaven sword technique was displayed to the fullest. The sword light that filled the sky was like 1,000 zhong, illuminating the entire space. The two were secretly shocked in their hearts. Fair-faced Flying Dragon said in his heart that he was even more powerful than the legends made him out to be. Tang Zheng, on the other hand, had a strange expression. Just where did this fair-faced Flying Dragon come from? He was definitely an expert of the great scholar realm. Moreover, he did not seem like a first or second stage great scholar like Long Xinyuan. He was unable to determine this person's specific cultivation, but he was definitely a true expert. Tang Zheng had just experienced the battle between the State Master and Yamata Orochi not long ago, so he was not unfamiliar with this level of battle. In fact, he was getting more and more used to it. The battle between the two became more and more intense. There were traces of the War Spirit sword and the flying dagger on the altar. The dagger was like a chisel, severely damaging the altar. Seeing this, Professor Qi even had the heart to die. Tears were about to drip out as he shouted, "Destroyed! Destroyed!" The complicated patterns on the ground could definitely be studied to find many useful things, but it was destroyed just like that. As a scholar, one could imagine how painful it was. It was even more painful than killing him. However, the battle did not change according to his will. The two of them were bound to determine victory or defeat, or even life and death. Although Tang Zheng was only at the 9th stage of fasting, and was still a step away from the Golden Core realm, his cultivation was lower than fair-faced Flying Dragons. However, he had the help of a divine weapon and was not at a disadvantage for a while. The sound of the battle was not small, and it was especially clear in this empty and deathly silent space. Suddenly, both of their ears twitched, and they subconsciously looked in a direction. They could not see anything in the darkness, but there was obviously something. As if to verify their guess, the sound became louder and louder. Bang, bang, bang. It was like a heavy object hitting the ground. It was like the sound of a drum, heavily pounding on people's hearts, causing their heartstrings to tremble. Even so, the two of them did not give up on the battle. Instead, the battle became more and more intense, and danger surrounded them. Professor Chi also heard the sound and stretched his neck to look outside the altar. Suddenly, his pupils dilated rapidly and his mouth opened wide. It was as if someone had grabbed his throat, and he couldn't even let out a scream. When the two saw his reaction, they rushed to the edge of the altar at the same time and looked down. F***CK. Both of them cursed in their hearts at the same time as their scalps went numb. Countless people were standing on the ground below, all of them looking up at the altar. Bronze mask. Tang Zheng raised his head and exclaimed. Everyone was wearing the same bronze mask as the one in the painting, but there were too many bronze masks. Although Tang Zheng really wanted the bronze masks, this many still made his scalp go numb. Moreover, the empty eyes behind the bronze masks showed that these were definitely not living people. Not a living person. That was a dead person. In fact, they weren't even dead people. Tang Zheng had even been to the world of spirits and souls. Of course, he knew that there were many things in this world that he had never heard of or even thought of. Obviously, these people weren't good people. When they saw the three people on the altar, they sped up. Like monkeys, they climbed up the pillars of the altar and climbed up the altar at lightning speed. Tang Zheng and fair-faced flying dragon looked at each other at the same time and subconsciously stopped fighting. Fair-faced flying dragon muttered to himself, "My attention was all attracted by the heavenly palace just now. I really didn't see so many things hidden below." Professor Chi's face was bitter as he sighed. "I'm afraid that you guys destroyed their altar, so they're coming to kill us." Altar? The two of them looked down subconsciously. Indeed, the altar was full of holes and scars. Huh! The two of them exclaimed at the same time and stared straight at the altar. It turned out that there was a faint light flowing in the altar, as if something had been triggered. Looks like it's true. Tang Zheng sighed softly. Altars were very mysterious in ancient times, and the altar here was even more so. The two of them almost destroyed the altar. Of course, they must have triggered some mechanism to attract the group of bronze masks. They're coming up. Professor Chi had been lying on the edge of the altar and yelled at the top of his lungs. The two of them tensed up. Fair-faced flying dragon looked deeply at Tang Zheng and said, "Looks like we can't kill you today. Stay alive. The next time we meet, you won't be so lucky." Fair-faced flying dragon leaped down from the altar as soon as he finished speaking. Professor Chi screamed. He didn't expect fair-faced flying dragon to walk right into his trap. Tang Zheng's face tensed up, but he didn't think so. Sure enough, the fair-faced flying dragon spread its wings like a rock and landed on the ground. The tip of its foot landed heavily on one of the bronze masks. With a loud bang, the bronze mask shattered into pieces and scattered all over the ground. Then, he did the same. Like a bird flying across the water, he flew above the bronze mask. Every time he landed, a bronze mask would be destroyed. Bang! Suddenly, a loud sound interrupted Tang Zheng's observation. He saw a bronze mask jump up the altar and crazily pounce at the two of them. They were wearing armor and looked like warriors. They were full of killing intent and gloomy. Tang Zheng's eyes were filled with killing intent. With a kacha sound, War Soul cut the opponent in half and scattered on the ground, turning into pieces. But before he could catch his breath, the sound of falling bodies came one after another. In the blink of an eye, the altar was densely packed with bronze masks. Their empty eyes and dense yin-chi struck the heart. If it was a coward, they would have collapsed. Fortunately, Professor Chi had been in the field of archaeology for decades and had seen many strange things. Although he was afraid, he didn't completely lose his wolf. His attention was attracted by something else. The pieces scattered on the ground. Professor Chi picked up a piece and smelled it. He then carefully broke it and examined it carefully. Suddenly, his face changed. He shouted at Tang Zheng's back, "Tang Zheng, they are terracotta warriors." Terracotta warriors. Tang Zheng's first thought was the terracotta soldiers and horses. Their craftsmanship was as good as the heavens, shocking the hearts of people. But compared to the ones in front of him, those were too mediocre. At least, those terracotta warriors were dead and couldn't move on their own. These were living terracotta warriors, and they were quite lethal. Professor Chi couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. He praised, "It's too miraculous. Qin Shi Huang is indeed a great emperor. He actually created so many living terracotta figures. This is no longer something that can be done by humans. It's a miracle." Yes, in Professor Chi's mind, this was a miracle. It was not something that could be done by humans. Tang Zheng, on the other hand, saw some clues. These terracotta warriors were nourished by yin qi, accumulated over time, and experienced thousands of years to create such a spectacle. Just now, when he had just stepped onto the altar, he had already noticed that the yin qi on the altar was denser than in other places. It was as if it was water, filling the air. Obviously, other than offering sacrifices, this altar might also be used to collect the yin qi in the ancient tomb to nourish these terracotta warriors. In fact, along the way, Tang Zheng had been puzzled. This place was filled with yin qi, so how could there not be any yin soldiers or evil gong filthy things? Now, the answer was revealed. It turned out that the yin qi was all used to nourish these terracotta warriors. There was no extra to nurture those things. These terracotta warriors were not weaker than those things. More and more terracotta warriors climbed onto the altar like a flood. They were densely packed, numbering in the thousands. They had already completely occupied the altar. Tang Zheng took out the heaven-shocking bow and the sun-shooting arrow. There were too many enemies, and the War Soul sword might not be able to kill his way out. "Tang Zheng, what should we do?" Professor Chi asked fearfully. "Hide behind me, and follow me to kill our way out." Tang Zheng said resolutely, as if he was alone, it would not be difficult to escape. But with Professor Chi by his side, all of this would be wishful thinking. Professor Chi mustered up all the courage in his body, preventing his legs from going soft from fear. He followed closely behind Tang Zheng. The terracotta warriors had already rushed over like a tidal wave. Their killing intent and yin qi covered the sky and earth, reaching a peak. "Kill!" Tang Zheng roared. The sun-shooting arrow left the bowstring. The surging qi instantly tore apart the few terracotta warriors at the front, and the terracotta warriors at the back followed closely behind, rushing over. Bang, bang, bang. The terracotta warriors continued to explode, filling the sky with fragments. Suddenly, a horse's neigh sounded out in this empty space. A war horse made of terracotta warriors soared into the air and flew up from below, its 4 hooves landing heavily on the altar. On the back of the horse sat a terracotta warrior. His attire was completely different from the other terracotta warriors, and he looked like a general. With a stretch of his hand, he grabbed the sun-shooting arrow that was flying towards him. The sun-shooting arrow was already at the end of its flight and did not have much power left. But even so, it could be seen that the other party was definitely not someone the other terracotta warriors could compare to. Tang Zheng's face changed slightly. One less sun-shooting arrow would be a huge loss, and he would definitely not allow this to happen. Thus, he leaped up, pulled Professor Chi, and flew over the densely packed terracotta warriors' heads and rushed straight towards the general. A cold light flashed in the general's eyes. He placed the sun-shooting arrow on the warhorse, and a long spear appeared in his hand. With a shake of the spear, he pierced towards Tang Zheng with the force of 1,000 kilograms. Tang Zheng was in the air, and beside him was a Professor Chi. His strength was greatly reduced, but he still reacted accordingly. He kept the heaven-shocking bow and used the War Soul sword instead. Clang! A muffled explosion sounded out, like a bolt from the blue, causing the surrounding terracotta warriors to sway. Chapter 733. Amidst the army of 10,000, the overwhelming killing intent and yin qi swept over like a tornado. The two of them were like small boats drifting in the wind, ready to fall apart at any moment. Kill! Tang Zheng roared. He was not one to go with the flow. He immediately summoned the four manifestations venerable. Its massive body immediately made the other terracotta figures look like ants. The four manifestations venerable had been heavily injured. Tang Zheng had yet to find a way to repair it, but it was still capable of basic physical defense and attack. With a leap, Tang Zheng pulled Professor Qi and drilled into the body of the four divine beasts, seizing the attacks that covered the sky and earth. The four divine beasts' body immediately rang out with ping 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 sounds. This was the first time Professor Qi had entered the four manifestations venerable. He was like Granny Lu entering the Grandview Garden. He wanted nothing more than to double his eyes and greedily observe his surroundings. Back then, he had personally witnessed the four manifestations' venerable strength in the 100,000 mountains. However, that was only a passing encounter. Moreover, that was outside, and he was unable to enter the interior. Now that he had gotten what he wanted, he was like a child who had obtained his favorite toy. The corners of his mouth cracked open, and he could not stop smiling foolishly. However, Tang Zheng was not as optimistic. His expression was extremely grim as he controlled the four manifestations venerable to charge towards the edge of the altar. How could the terracotta figures let him do as he pleased? The general swung his spear, and the other terracotta figures let out soundless roars. Like maggots attached to the bones, they quickly climbed up the four manifestations venerable in an attempt to attack its vital points. Go to hell! Tang Zheng angrily roared, and the four symbols venerable immediately waved his arms, sweeping away the terracotta figures that were climbing up his body. Ding ding dang dang, like rain hitting banana leaves. These terracotta figures fell to the ground one after another, shattering into pieces. However, it was still no match for the sheer number of terracotta figures. Before long, the terracotta figures had climbed all over the four manifestations venerable's body. They exerted force on its chest and head. Banging sounds rang out incessantly. The four manifestations' venerable strength had already been greatly reduced. Faced with such an attack, even Tang Zheng felt like his heart had been struck by a heavy punch. His face paled. However, he did not give up. He swept the terracotta figures off his chest, then with a tap of his foot, he shot towards the edge of the altar like an arrow. He had succeeded. The four symbols venerable leaped into the air and rapidly descended to the ground. Roar! All of a sudden, a low roar exploded above their heads as the general galloped out of the altar. Bang! With a muffled thud, the warhorse actually landed on top of the four symbols venerable. Clang! The spear struck the top of the four symbols venerable's head. The tremendous force caused the four symbols venerable to fall even faster. Boom! After an earth-shattering boom, the four symbols venerable landed on the ground. Cracks spread out in all directions, and the terracotta figures on his body lost their balance and fell to the ground one after another. They were thrown off their feet and shattered into pieces. The four symbols knight wanted to run, but the general above him had accumulated another attack. The cold light of the spear flashed, and it looked like it was about to hit the four symbols knight again. Tang Zheng was well aware of the situation of the four divine beasts. If it had been in the past, it would have been invulnerable, but now it had been severely injured, and its strength had been greatly reduced. The force just now had almost split open the four symbols venerable's head. If it happened again, he couldn't guarantee that the four symbols venerable would still be safe and sound. Clearly, the enemy wouldn't show any mercy. Tang Zheng hurriedly controlled the four symbols venerable and grabbed at the top of his head. Gotcha! The warhorse was caught head-on and shattered into pieces. Even the shooting sun arrows fell into the large hand. The general had already flown up and dodged the attack, but the spear's attack didn't decrease in the slightest. Pooh! The spear pierced through the four symbols venerable's palm. Tang Zheng let out a heart-wrenching scream. When he looked down, he saw that his palm was also bleeding profusely. At this moment, he and the four symbols venerable had become one. Injuring the four symbols venerable was injuring him. He endured the pain and slapped down with his other hand. The huge palm immediately enveloped the other party in a shadow. The general hurriedly pulled back his spear, wanting to block the attack. However, the fingers of the injured palm closed and grabbed the spear, making it impossible for the general to pull back his spear to block. Seeing this, the general was shocked. He let go of his spear and raised both his hands to block. However, the strength of the four symbols venerable was ultimately not something he could resist. With a muffled bang, the general was flattened to the ground, leaving behind only fragments. Phew! Tang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could rejoice, he saw the terracotta soldiers swarming over like a tide. Let's go! The four symbols venerable took large strides and rushed toward the celestial palace. At this moment, he couldn't care less about the spiritual energy on the bronze masks. Although the bronze masks were very tempting, they were like thorny roses. The four symbols venerable was extremely fast, and the terracotta soldiers were clearly unable to catch up. In the blink of an eye, they left the densely packed terracotta soldiers behind them. Suddenly, Tang Zheng listened attentively and frowned. Why is there no movement behind me? He turned his head curiously. He couldn't help but cry out in alarm. He saw that the densely packed terracotta soldiers had actually stopped their pursuit and were looking at him with hollow eyes from afar. What's going on? Why aren't they chasing me? Tang Zheng couldn't figure it out and subconsciously looked up. The Celestial Palace. Two huge words appeared above his head. These two words were floating, but there was no sign or anything like that. They just quietly floated above his head. He suddenly realized that he had unknowingly arrived in front of the Celestial Palace. There must be some kind of restriction on the Celestial Palace that prevented the terracotta soldiers from approaching. Since that was the case, there was no need to stay in the four symbols venerable anymore. He and Professor Qi left the four symbols venerable. Professor Qi was reluctant to leave. Although he didn't gain much, this kind of experience was too rare. Professor Qi sighed in disappointment as he watched the four symbols venerable disappear before his eyes. However, in an instant, he sucked in a breath of cold air. Then, as if he had been fixed in place, he looked up blankly. What was above his head? Of course, it was the Celestial Palace. Not just the two words Celestial Palace, but the actual Celestial Palace itself. When looking at the Celestial Palace from afar, one would be shocked by its majesty. Now that he was standing at the foot of the Celestial Palace, this feeling was especially strong. It was so shocking that he could barely find words to describe it. Tang Zheng's feelings were more or less the same. He saw that the Celestial Palace above his head was endless, as if it really towered into the clouds. Fair-faced flying dragon has already entered the Celestial Palace. Let's follow. Tang Zheng said resolutely. There was already no way out for the thousands of soldiers and horses behind them. Moreover, since they were already here, they naturally couldn't just leave without taking a look. Although they knew that there would be danger inside. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, they still walked towards it. The two of them walked over confidently. The Celestial Palace's palace gate was very huge. It was even taller and bigger than the tomb gate. The two of them arrived in front of the palace gate. There was actually a corpse in front of the palace gate. Second brother Wu. The two of them recognized the corpse at the same time. Wasn't this the second brother Wu who had escaped without a trace? They didn't expect that he would actually escape to the front of the palace gate, but in the end, he didn't survive. Grave robbers deserve to die. Professor Qi sighed. Ignoring second brother Wu, the two of them focused on the palace gate. The palace gate was tightly shut. Tang Zheng pushed with both hands, but the gate didn't move an inch. His expression changed slightly as he sighed faintly. Professor Qi, we can only rely on you. Since Professor Qi could open the tomb gate, then perhaps he could also open the palace gate. Professor Qi walked forward and said while surveying, Fair-faced flying dragon is much earlier than us. Could it be that he has already entered? He's so familiar with this place. It wouldn't be strange if he had already entered. Tang Zheng said indifferently, just who is this person? Professor Qi was also very curious. Tang Zheng shook his head solemnly. This person was too strange. Not only did he know him, but he also wanted to kill him. When did he offend such an expert? How come he didn't know? Only fair-faced flying dragon could answer this question. Perhaps they would meet again in the Celestial Palace later on. They would definitely face off against each other, and perhaps it would really be a life and death battle. Time passed minute by minute as Professor Qi focused on studying the palace gate. Tang Zheng was bored to death and focused on observing the surroundings. The ancient tomb was originally quite dark, but it seemed that the stars in the sky were sprinkling down starlight, making the place much brighter than the altar. It was like the first glimmer of dawn. In short, the celestial palace's majestic silhouette could be clearly seen. Crack! Suddenly, a strange sound interrupted Tang Zheng's thoughts. He saw the celestial palace's gate open little by little. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. It was a wise move to bring Professor Qi with him. Otherwise, he would have entered the celestial palace no matter what. The palace gate opened wide. Tang Zheng and Professor Qi looked at each other excitedly and cautiously walked in. The interior of the celestial palace was as bright as day. As soon as they entered, they saw majestic terracotta soldiers standing on both sides. However, the energy on these terracotta soldiers wasn't dense enough. They hadn't come back to life. Tang Zheng and Professor Qi's hearts were in their throats. If these terracotta soldiers came back to life and attacked, the two of them would have offended them. After passing through the long corridor, the scene in front of them suddenly opened up. There were pavilions, small bridges, flowing water, fake mountains, and lakes. It really did look like a magnificent palace. The two of them smacked their lips and exclaimed, "The Celestial Palace really lives up to its name." It was built according to ancient palaces. Professor Qi's eyes were rolling. He almost couldn't see. His mouth was wide open and dazzled. He was so happy that he almost fainted. This kind of spectacle was hard to come by in a lifetime. Chapter 734. Seeing fair-faced flying dragon again, both of them could not help but tense up. At the same time, both of them were attracted by the coffin. Qin Shi Huang's coffin. The same thought popped into their minds at the same time. This was something that many people dreamed of, and they did not expect to find it. Qin Shi Huang had too many secrets, and his coffin might be able to give them many answers. Professor Qi could not wait to rush up and check it out. However, he was afraid of fair-faced flying dragon, so he had to suppress this strong impulse. "What do we do?" Professor Qi asked in a low voice. Before Tang Zheng could answer, fair-faced flying dragon had already turned his head and looked over. Both of them were shocked. Tang Zheng was ready to fight, but fair-faced flying dragon turned his head again and stared straight at the coffin, ignoring the two. Both of them were slightly surprised. This was not fair-faced flying dragon style. That coffin, could it be that there was something special about it? "Let's go." Tang Zheng made a decision. Professor Qi was overjoyed. Okay. Thus, the two of them carefully approached the coffin, but fair-faced flying dragon still did not react. Finally, they arrived in front of the coffin and were only a few steps away from fair-faced flying dragon. However, when they saw what was in front of them, they could no longer care about fair-faced flying dragon. They finally understood why fair-faced flying dragon had such a reaction. There were two coffins in front of them. Could there be someone else buried in Qin Shi Huang's tomb besides Qin Shi Huang? Who could it be? Who had the qualifications? At that moment, the three of them were filled with this question, and fair-faced flying dragon was no exception. He stared at the coffin in a daze, not knowing what to do. After Professor Qi recovered from his shock, he was extremely excited. This was definitely a discovery that would shock the world. This trip was worth it. He could not help but reach out and touch the coffin. "Stop!" Fair-faced flying dragon saw this and screamed in shock. Professor Qi retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted. Before he could understand what was going on, he heard a voice coming from the coffin. "There's movement inside." Tang Zheng and Professor Qi were shocked at the same time. Could it be that there was also a living thing inside? Qin Shi Huang? A few thousand years had passed. Could it be that he was still alive? Tang Zheng was awestruck. Didn't the five-clawed golden dragon swear that Qin Shi Huang had committed too many sins and was not tolerated by the heavenly Tao and finally died? Then why would there be movement in the coffin? Fair-faced flying dragon's face turned ashen as he roared. "You are causing trouble. Do you know that?" What do you mean? Tang Zheng shielded Professor Qi and asked. He is alive. Alive? Tang Zheng and Professor Qi exclaimed in unison. Yes, as long as his coffin is stained with the aura of a living person, he will be revived. Otherwise, why do you think I'm standing here? Fair-faced flying dragon said bitterly. Coming back from the dead? How is that possible? Furthermore, it happened a few years ago. Although Tang Zheng was a cultivator, he had never seen such a miraculous thing. Fair-faced flying dragon coldly snorted and said, You are a cultivator. Don't you understand that there are all kinds of strange things in this world? I'm sorry. I didn't know. Professor Qi said with grievance. Fair-faced flying dragon acted as if he didn't hear anything. With a tap of his foot, he quickly retreated to the bottom of the stairs. Tang Zheng was alerted and inwardly cursed. Qin Shi Huang was a celestial and an emperor. Just how high was his cultivation base? Tang Zheng couldn't imagine. Moreover, he killed people like flies. How could he let these people go when they trespassed into his tomb? Danger. Retreat. Tang Zheng pulled Professor Qi and prepared to retreat down the stairs. However, a loud sound interrupted his movements. The coffin lid flew high up into the air, and an earth-shattering killing intent leaked out from the coffin. In an instant, this small area was completely enveloped by this killing intent. It caused people to involuntarily tremble, and Tang Zheng even began to hallucinate. It was as if there was an army of thousands of horses charging towards him, wanting to tear him to pieces. He knew something was wrong and hurriedly bit his tongue. The sharp pain immediately woke him up from the hallucination. Professor Qi wasn't so lucky. His eyes were dull, and he lost consciousness. Whoosh! A black shadow flew out from the coffin and floated in the air, staring straight at Tang Zheng and Professor Qi. Tang Zheng was shocked. This person was no different from a living person, but the killing intent on his body was definitely something that could only be created by a true 10,000 slaughterer. Moreover, his attire was very similar to the attire of Qin Shi Huang that Tang Zheng had seen in the textbooks before, but it was more dignified. Just one look from him would probably scare some timid people to the point of breaking their guts. How dare you? Who are you? How dare you break into my tomb? The other party finally spoke. His voice was like a bell, echoing in people's ears for a long time. Tang Zheng's heart thumped. He finally confirmed that the other party was the famous Qin Shi Huang. He had really been resurrected. His face immediately turned pale. He couldn't tell if it was a blessing or a curse to resurrect such an ancient emperor. Seeing that they didn't respond, Qin Shi Huang said eerily, Trespassing into the forbidden area means only death for you. You are lucky to die in my hands. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shi Huang pulled out a treasured sword from his waist. When the blade was unsheathed, the sound of the sword was extremely loud, like the sound of a horn on a battlefield. The Taya sword. Fair-faced flying dragon's expression finally changed when he saw the sword. He couldn't help but cry out. Tang Zheng's pupils shrank. Although he didn't know the origin of the Taya sword, it was obvious that as Qin Shi Huang's sword, it was definitely not an ordinary item. You actually recognize my Taya sword. Qin Shi Huang looked at fair-faced flying dragon in surprise and clicked his tongue in wonder. Fair-faced flying dragon's expression didn't change. Of course he would recognize the Taya sword because he had come for it. According to legend, the Taya sword was created by an ancient swordsmith. It was a true divine weapon that accompanied Qin Shi Huang on his expeditions and drank the blood of countless people. It was a very powerful weapon that ordinary people couldn't use. In the end, the Taya sword was buried with Qin Shi Huang as a burial item. However, the Taya sword's illustrious reputation was still passed down through various channels. Fair-faced flying dragon couldn't forget the Taya sword when he heard the news. When he heard about the ancient tomb this time, he guessed that it was most likely the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the one he had been looking for all this time. If he had the Taya sword, it would be like adding wings to a tiger for him. Therefore, he came here without hesitation. But seeing the Taya sword in Qin Shi Huang's hands, he felt despair. Although he was very confident in his own strength, he still didn't have the confidence to face Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang was a legendary figure, an emperor throughout the ages. He was simply too powerful, and no one had much courage to resist him. Although Tang Zheng understood the difference in strength, he still had to resist, especially when he saw his opponent waving the Taya sword. He hurriedly used War Soul to block. Clang! In just one move, Tang Zheng was sent flying and crashed into another coffin. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood, dyeing the coffin red. Not even being able to receive a single move from Qin Shi Huang made Tang Zheng feel a mix of emotions. Although they were both Skywalkers, the difference was too great. Oomph! You dare to come to my tomb with such weak strength? You're courting death. Qin Shi Huang said disdainfully. He wasn't in a hurry to kill Tang Zheng. Instead, he turned and stared at fair-faced flying dragon. As for Professor Qi, he didn't even look at him. He didn't even need to look at such an ordinary person. Now it's your turn, Qin Shi Huang said to fair-faced flying dragon. Fair-faced flying dragon's face was ashen. He knew he couldn't escape today, but he didn't run. In front of Qin Shi Huang, running would only lead to a faster death. He took a deep breath and strode towards Qin Shi Huang. The Taya sword hasn't drunk human blood for a long time. Today, I'll use your blood to reseal it. Qin Shi Huang flew toward fair-faced flying dragon. So. A series of flying knives shot toward Qin Shi Huang. The cold light formed a string, and the whistling sound of air breaking rang out. Insignificant skill, Qin Shi Huang said disdainfully. The Taya sword slashed through the air, and all the flying knives were split into two. Fair-faced flying dragon's eyes flashed with despair. In this world, his strength was already at the peak. But in front of an ancient emperor, he was like a baby, unable to withstand a single blow. Boom! The Taya sword slashed through the air, and the sword light slashed down. More than half of the stairs were destroyed, and rocks flew everywhere, leaving behind a long and deep ravine. Fair-faced flying dragon dodged to the side in a sorry state. His exquisite clothes had a few large holes, and there was a trace of blood on his face. He was completely different from his previous high-spirited self. Tang Zheng saw this scene from afar, but he didn't gloat. He only felt a deep sense of helplessness. Was he really going to die here today? No, he would never give up. Even at the last moment, he would never give up. Seeing that Qin Shi Huang's attention was attracted by fair-faced flying dragon, he crawled up with difficulty. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and took out the heaven-shocking bow and shooting sun arrows. He knocked an arrow and aimed the shooting sun arrows at Qin Shi Huang's back. Fair-faced flying dragon's gaze went past Qin Shi Huang and coincidentally saw this scene. His heart moved. Although the two of them were enemies, but facing Qin Shi Huang, who was an even stronger enemy, the two of them had to work together. Without any verbal agreement, the two of them formed an alliance. Fair-faced flying dragon soared into the sky and waved his arm, roaring, "Heavenly maiden scattering flowers." In an instant, the sky was filled with flying daggers that shot towards Qin Shi Huang from all directions. At the same time, Tang Zheng's fingers released the bowstring. With a wong sound, the shooting sun arrows left the bowstring. With flying knives in front and shooting sun arrows behind, it was a pincer attack. Qin Shi Huang acted as if he didn't even see it. He gently raised the Taya sword. In that instant, the sky changed color. The entire space seemed to have frozen. The shooting sun arrows and flying knives seemed to have been frozen. Chapter 735. The light disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Flying dagger? It turned into pieces and scattered all over the ground. Sun-shooting arrow? It landed on the ground, dim and lifeless. Qin Shi Huang stood proudly, floating in the air, maintaining the posture of swinging his sword. Tang Zheng and fair-faced flying dragon attacked from the front and back, but they were unable to do anything to Qin Shi Huang. Their expressions involuntarily became even more unsightly. Qin Shi Huang looked down at fair-faced flying dragon and said, "You guys are too weak." Before he finished speaking, the Taya sword flew out, shooting straight towards fair-faced flying dragon. Fair-faced flying dragon retreated in panic, retreating again and again like a tornado, disappearing without a trace in a short while. However, the Taiya sword was like a shadow, chasing after it relentlessly, disappearing together with it. Qin Shi Huang did not seem to care at all. He turned around and fixed his gaze on Tang Zheng. With a wave of his hand, the sun-shooting arrow on the ground flew into his hands. His large hand gently brushed past the sun-shooting arrow, and he clicked his tongue in wonder. Heaven-shocking bow, sun-shooting arrow. You actually have these two divine armaments. Your luck is not small. However, you are too weak. It is impossible for you to protect these two divine armaments. Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched. The other party actually recognized these two weapons. I will grant you a quick death. Die. After Qin Shi Huang finished speaking, he had already arrived in front of Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng did not even see how the other party moved, and his chest was hit heavily by a palm, causing him to fiercely fall onto the coffin. He spat out a mouthful of blood, dyeing the coffin red. All the bones in Tang Zheng's body were about to fall apart. His internal organs were displaced, and blood kept flowing out from the corner of his mouth. He had experienced so many dangers, but this time was the most serious. He had no strength to resist, and he was already heavily injured, to the point where he could not even draw the heaven-shocking bow. He wanted to summon the four symbols venerable, but the four symbols venerable was already heavily injured. He was afraid that it would be difficult for him to support himself, and he might even be torn apart by Qin Shi Huang. Even if he were to die, he did not want the four symbols venerable to accompany him in death. Your resistance to attacks isn't bad, Qin Shi Huang praised. If an ordinary person were to take this attack of mine, they would have been smashed to pieces. Tang Zheng laughed bitterly in his heart. This was of course the effect of the chaotic Vajra mantra. He had already cultivated to the iron bones realm, and his bones were as hard as steel, but they were still about to fall apart. This showed just how powerful Qin Shi Huang's attacks were. However, he's still too weak. Only death awaits him. With that said, Qin Shi Huang's palm pressed over again. This time, Tang Zheng could clearly see the trajectory of his attack, but strangely, he still couldn't dodge. He could only watch as the pair of hands attacked. It's over. This was the only thought left in his mind. That was because even though this attack seemed slow, its offensive power had clearly increased explosively. If he took this palm, even if his bones were made of iron, they would still shatter. He gritted his teeth and didn't beg for mercy. He didn't shrink back. He was like a warrior who would rather die than submit. He stood there proudly. Even if he had to die, he couldn't die like a coward. Bang! With a loud sound, Tang Zheng felt as if his eardrums were about to burst. His chest was struck by a powerful force, and although it was uncomfortable, it was not fatal. Obviously, this was not the power of Qin Shi Huang's attack. He subconsciously lowered his head to look. The Qin First Emperor's palm was right in front of his chest, but there was still a fine line between it and his chest. This was because a white hand had passed through his ribs and blocked the Qin First Emperor's large hand. The difference between the two palms, one big and one small, was obvious. However, this pair of weak and small palms blocked Qin Shi Huang's attack without trembling at all. Qin Shi Huang retreated, his expression fluctuating. His pupils widened as he stared straight at Tang Zheng. Behind him, Tang Zheng also felt that something was amiss. A ball of yin qi enveloped his back, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head in the middle of winter. It was bone-chilling. However, what surprised him was that this wave of yin qi was not completely like ordinary yin qi. Waves of strange energy drilled into his pores and flowed into his 8 extraordinary meridians. Pure yin qi. His eyes lit up as he finally recognized this familiar thing. This wave of yin qi actually contained pure yin qi. This was something that Tang Zheng yearned for even in his dreams. Most importantly, it was impossible for yin qi to contain pure yin qi. This was also why he had to rely on absorbing pure yin qi from a woman to neutralize pure yang qi, and not simply absorbing yin qi. That way, he wouldn't have to be so troubled and distressed. He knew that there was someone behind him, and it was a woman. A woman with such heavy yin qi. Could it be a female ghost? No, of course not. She was a living person. He could already hear the sound of his heartbeat. How could another person suddenly appear in this tomb? And it was a woman, an expert that could block Qin Shi Huang. Before he could turn his head, Qin Shi Huang's voice had already sounded, Empyrean Fairy. How did you wake up? Empyrean Fairy. Tang Zheng had never heard of these words. Hearing this name, it seemed that her background was not small, but he had never heard of such a person in the Jianghu. No, she woke up. Tang Zheng finally grasped the crux of the matter. This word was too important. Could it be that this Empyrean Fairy had been sleeping all this time? He slowly turned his head and glanced at the coffin from the corner of his eyes. He didn't know when, but it had already been opened, and there were still traces of his blood on the coffin. Finally, he clearly saw the person behind him. A beautiful face and a classical beauty, filled with holiness and coldness, giving people a feeling of being thousands of miles away. This kind of beauty seemed to not exist in the human world, but in the 9 heavens. What made Tang Zheng even more surprised was the yin qi that was continuously emitted from her body, as well as the pure yin qi that was contained within. This was much more dense and pure than the pure yin qi he had encountered before. Fang Shishir had a pure yin body, Lu Qingmei had a profound yin body, and Marshall had a yin fiend body. The pure yin qi in their bodies could not be compared to this person's. His heart skipped a beat as he remembered a body type that Tian Chanzi had once introduced, the saint body of 9 yin. The saint body of 9 yin was the same as the saint body of 9 yang. They were the strangest and most magical body types in the world. Many people often died young, unable to grow up. Therefore, these two types of body types were extremely rare in the world. Tang Zheng had never thought that he would see someone with this type of body type, let alone in this ancient tomb. For a moment, he had mixed feelings. If he absorbed the pure yin qi in the saint body of 9 yin, then his pure yang qi would definitely be neutralized by a large portion. But looking at her face that kept people away, his thoughts suddenly disappeared. This Empyrean Fairy was too strong, so strong that it was suffocating. Even Tang Zheng felt that he was very small in front of her. Without a doubt, the Empyrean Fairy was lying in the other coffin. Why was she lying in there? What was her relationship with Qin Shi Huang? Could it be that she was also a person from thousands of years ago? How could so many people from thousands of years ago suddenly appear? However, when he thought about the appearance of Hundred Faces Star, a person from the ancient era tens of thousands of years ago, these two people did not seem that difficult to accept. Why did the Empyrean Fairy want to save him? Wasn't she in cahoots with Qin Shi Huang? The Empyrean Fairy ignored Tang Zheng's gaze and stared coldly at Qin Shi Huang. She said, "Ying Zhang, you sealed me when I was unprepared. Today, I will return what you did to me in double." Sealed? Tang Zheng suddenly understood. No wonder the Empyrean Fairy wanted to save him. It turned out that she and Qin Shi Huang were not in cahoots, but enemies. But why did Qin Shi Huang seal her and bury her in this tomb together? There were many doubts. Qin Shi Huang's expression changed for the first time. He arrogantly said, "Empyrean Fairy, when I asked you to dual cultivate with me, it could help us both return to our peak. You refused many times. Seeing that my time is almost up, if I don't seal you and bury you here with me, when I revive in the future, my pure young energy will erupt. How can I live?" Shameless. The Empyrean Fairy's eyes emitted a terrifying cold light as she spoke with killing intent. "Ha, the 9 yang saint body should be with the 9 yin saint body. This is the way of the heavens. Moreover, I am an emperor above millions of people and also a celestial. Could it be that I am not worthy of you? You will never be worthy." The Empyrean Fairy did not give him any face as she firmly said. Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat. To dare to refute Qin Shi Huang like this, how much courage did she need? However, he finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. Qin Shi Huang did not obtain the Empyrean Fairy back then. His time was almost up and he did not have a way to live, so he buried the Empyrean Fairy with him here. When he had a chance to revive in the future, he would think of a way to dual cultivate with the Empyrean Fairy and increase his cultivation. This dream was beautiful. If Tang Zheng did not interfere, perhaps his wish would have been fulfilled. Qin Shi Huang was rejected in front of an outsider. He immediately felt that he had lost a lot of face and glared at Tang Zheng with killing intent. Tang Zheng innocently rolled his eyes, but he did not back down. Empyrean Fairy, how did you break through my seal? Qin Shi Huang temporarily swallowed his anger. He thought that he would definitely tear this eyesore of a young man into 10,000 pieces. He then asked the Empyrean Fairy. The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens did not immediately answer. Instead, she looked at Tang Zheng with a complicated gaze. Her eyes were filled with splendor, and the corner of her mouth slightly curled up. Zheng, you claim to be smarter than everyone in the world. The answer is clearly right in front of you, but you don't know it at all. What do you mean? Qin Shi Huang did not understand. Do you really think that you are the only celestial in this world? Of course. Only one celestial appears every few thousand years. Then how many years have you spent outside? This? Qin Shi Huang was stumped. Haha, I think you are not smart but too stupid. The outside world must have already passed many years ago. That new celestial will naturally appear. Impossible. Qin Shi Huang's eyes flashed with a hint of panic as he denied. Everything is right in front of you, but you don't know anything. Look at you. You are the stupidest person in the world. Look at what special trait he has. The 9th heaven mystical maiden pointed at Tang Zheng. Chapter 736. Qin Shi Huang stared at Tang Zheng as if he was looking at a ghost. He roared in disbelief. No, how could he be a celestial? Impossible. This is definitely impossible. There must be a mistake. A mistake. To be able to make an emperor panic like this, it could be seen how big of an impact it had on his heart. In truth, the reason why Qin Shi Huang was able to unify the world and become a hegemon was because of his identity as a celestial. Thus, he knew what this identity meant. Not even in his dreams would he have thought that he would immediately meet another celestial after reviving. When two of the same kind met, there was no appreciation, only hatred. Killing intent surged out from Qin Shi Huang's body. In an instant, it was as if heaven and earth had changed color. So what if he is a celestial? He is so weak. I can kill him with a single finger. Qin Shi Huang's words were not false. If the two of them fought one-on-one, Tang Zheng would not be his opponent no matter what. Seeing Qin Shi Huang's huge reaction, Tang Zheng was shocked, but he also understood that his identity had already caused the other party to be filled with intense killing intent. If he wanted to escape from the ancient tomb, it would be even more difficult. The Empyrean Fairy walked out from behind Tang Zheng. Her slender body contained an extremely powerful strength, causing Tang Zheng to feel inferior. Since you know his identity, you should be able to guess why I have awakened. Hearing that, Qin Shi Huang's gaze turned and stared at the blood on the coffin. That was precisely Tang Zheng's blood. Qin Shi Huang's eyes flashed with unwillingness. If he had known Tang Zheng's identity, he definitely would not have let him get close to the coffin. He would have directly killed him. It turned out that when Qin Shi Huang had sealed the Empyrean Fairy, only the blood of a celestial could undo the seal. Qin Shi Huang was very confident, thinking that he was the only celestial in the world. Other than him, no one else could undo the seal on the Empyrean Fairy. But due to a freak combination of factors, a few thousand years later, Tang Zheng appeared. His blood actually undid the seal without anyone knowing, allowing the Empyrean Fairy to awaken. Empyrean Fairy, so what if you've awakened? You weren't a match for me back then. Could it be that you're a match for me now? Humph, I won't be soft-hearted anymore. Whether you agree or not, you belong to me. Your 9 saint body will belong to me. Qin Shi Huang's eyebrows were raised in exultation as he spoke unrestrainedly. The Empyrean Fairy's expression changed slightly. She said, "Shameless. You couldn't get away with it thousands of years ago, and you won't get away with it now. I would rather give it to him than to you." When Qin Shi Huang heard this, he was furious. His murderous intent and anger rushed towards Tang Zheng. The Empyrean Fairy stepped forward and blocked all of this. Tang Zheng listened to the conversation between the two in a daze, and his heart was in turmoil, especially when he heard the 9th heaven profound maiden say that she would rather give herself to him than let Qin Shi Huang take advantage of her. His mind was greatly shaken, and he was extremely excited. But then, Qin Shi Huang's anger made him understand that this matter was not as easy as he thought. Qin Shi Huang wanted to tear him into pieces. It was better to throw such unrealistic thoughts to the back of his mind as soon as possible. Empyrean Fairy, you don't accept me, but you're willing to let this good-for-nothing boy take advantage of you. Humph, women are indeed stupid. Then I don't need to give you face. The first emperor of Qin said fiercely before disappearing. The Empyrean Fairy raised her jade-like arm and pointed at the void. Boom! A hurricane-like berserk aura appeared out of nowhere, blowing Tang Zheng so hard that he couldn't help but close his eyes. Then, he heard a thunderous rumbling sound, and everything returned to normal. When he opened his eyes again, he found Qin Shi Huang standing in the distance with blood on the corner of his mouth. The Empyrean Fairy was standing in front of him with a pale face. She had already retreated a few steps and was almost sticking to his body. "How are you?" Tang Zheng asked with concern. "I'm fine. I'll hold him back. You can leave." The Empyrean Fairy was expressionless and said with a cold tone, "Leave?" Tang Zheng almost blurted out okay, but he resisted the temptation and firmly shook his head. "How can a man like me let a woman hold the enemy back while I escape?" The Empyrean Fairy didn't appreciate it at all and coldly said, "Idiot." After saying this, she no longer paid attention to Tang Zheng and charged at Qin Shi Huang. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Her ancient clothing perfectly complemented her figure and temperament, making her look like a fairy. "Empyrean Fairy, after thousands of years, your strength is still inferior to mine. Moreover, you don't have the help of a treasure, so how can you be my opponent?" Qin Shi Huang laughed wildly. The Empyrean Fairy said, "You stole my treasure. Not only are you cruel and inhumane, you are also a bandit. You dare to insult me like this. If it was anyone else, they would have already died. However, I won't let you die. You are still very useful. I will rely on you to complete my divine technique." Qin Shi Huang also charged over. The two people soared into the air and began to fight in midair. The world changed color and the mountains shook. It was unknown how many steps were destroyed, and the coffin had long been destroyed. Tang Zheng raised his head and stared blankly at this pair of experts. He incessantly circulated his Zhen Qi in an attempt to repair his body. His body was already heavily injured, and he had to take this opportunity to repair it as soon as possible. Time slowly passed, and the two people's battle didn't stop. However, the Empyrean Fairy was gradually losing her strength. She couldn't do anything by herself. Professor Qi had long since been knocked unconscious by the shaking of the mountains and earth. He laid on the ground and lost consciousness. Tang Zheng couldn't help, so he simply sat down cross-legged and quickly circulated his divine technique. The ancient Clear Heaven Scroll and Dragon God technique immediately activated. Although the outside world was shaking, and it was like the end of the world, Tang Zheng's mind was completely focused. His heart had reached an unprecedented level of peace. Forgetting everything, he was like an outsider, calm and collected as he healed his injuries step by step. The Empyrean Fairy glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. Her eyes flashed with praise. As expected, Skywalkers were not ordinary people. Even if their cultivation was not high, this state of mind was something that ordinary people couldn't reach. Seeing the Empyrean Fairy's gaze, Qin Shi Huang was furious. He roared, "You still dare to look at him? Then I'll kill him first." Whoosh! He directly pounced on Tang Zheng. He was so fast that even the Empyrean Fairy couldn't block him. Tang Zheng was completely unaware. His Zhen Qi nourished his body bit by bit, and his injuries were already somewhat healed. "Stop!" the Empyrean Fairy shouted. Her figure flashed and blocked in front of Tang Zheng. Bang! Qin Shi Huang's palm directly landed on the Empyrean Fairy's shoulder. Like a kite with a broken string, she flew out and collided with Tang Zheng. She was lying on top of Tang Zheng, while Tang Zheng was lying on the ground. Tang Zheng was interrupted. He suddenly opened his eyes and found that the Empyrean Fairy was right in front of him. That beautiful face was almost touching his face. Moreover, the two's posture was a bit strange. One was lying down and the other was lying down. No matter how he looked at it, it was not suitable for children. His breathing couldn't help but become hurried. The hot air that he exhaled hit the Empyrean fairy's face. Her face immediately became colder and colder. Her eyes were cold like 1,000-year-old ice. "I'm sorry," Tangjung said in shame. She had sacrificed herself to save him, but he was like this. It was really too unreasonable. "You too." Qin Shi Huang was dumbfounded. "What a scandal. Brat, I'm going to kill you." He had a strong desire to possess an ancient person, especially an emperor. The two's posture was like a slap to the face. His face and ears were red, and his eyes were almost spitting fire. The Empyrean fairy calmly got up from Tang Zheng's body and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She had just taken a blow from Qin Shi Huang, and it didn't feel good. Tang Zheng also quickly stood up. Bam! Something rolled out from his backpack and attracted everyone's attention. The stately painting. Tang Zheng's heart trembled. The stately painting couldn't be stored in his Sumeru pouch. It had always been in his backpack. He didn't expect it to fall out. This was a treasure. He definitely couldn't let it fall into Qin Shi Huang's hands. He was about to bend down to pick it up. Swoosh! The painting of mountains and rivers of the gods of earth and veil flew away right under his nose. He turned pale with fright and hurriedly looked up, only to see that the painting of mountains and rivers of the gods of earth and veil did not fly to Qin Shi Huang. Instead, it fell into the hands of the ninth heaven maiden. The Empyrean fairy's face was finally no longer frozen. She showed some joy. Her jade-like fingers gently stroked the stately painting. When Qin Shi Huang saw this, he was shocked and shouted, "The stately painting! Brat, you actually have the stately painting." Tang Zheng looked at him blankly. He thought to himself, "Why can't I have the stately painting?" However, when he saw Qin Shi Huang's expression change, Tang Zheng realized more clearly that this treasure was extraordinary. What was so magical about the stately painting? He waited and saw. The Empyrean fairy finally raised her head and said, "Zheng, you just said that I don't have a magic treasure and I'm not your match. You didn't expect the stately painting to return to its rightful owner, did you?" Qin Shi Huang's expression changed. He was speechless. "Back then, you sealed me and took away my stately painting. Although I don't know what you did with the stately painting, it is finally back in my hands." Qin Shi Huang couldn't help but feel regret. Due to the uniqueness of the stately painting, he had purposely hidden the information of his tomb in the stately painting. This was so that when the stately painting was opened, not only would the descendants be able to find his tomb, but they would also be able to bring the stately painting into the ancient tomb. In this way, he could be resurrected and not let this treasure be lost. It could be said that he killed two birds with one stone. However, he didn't expect that Tang Zheng would bring the stately painting and awaken the Empyrean fairy. In the end, the stately painting returned to its rightful owner due to a freak combination of factors. Everything seemed to be predestined. Qin Shi Huang's scheming did not fulfill his wish in the end. Tang Zheng, on the other hand, was overjoyed. Although the stately painting was a rare treasure, he was not disappointed or disheartened because it was returned to its rightful owner. Instead, he was incomparably excited. A powerhouse like the mysterious lady of the ninth heaven should have such an extraordinary treasure. Chapter 737. The Empyrean fairy opened her hands slowly, and the stately painting unfurled bit by bit. A beautiful painting appeared before her eyes. Mountains, rivers, lakes, and peaks stacked on top of each other. It was beautiful and mysterious. The Empyrean fairy's eyes became colder and colder. "Zheng, today, I will return to you what you did to me 100 times over." As soon as she finished speaking, the stately painting flew into the air. Thousands of rays of light soared into the sky, illuminating the celestial palace as bright as day. A mysterious power rippled out. Qin Shi Huang's expression became unprecedentedly serious. He grabbed at the void and roared, "Tie a sword." Obviously, he didn't dare to be careless in front of the stately painting. He dared to use his weapon, Taiya's sword. Taiya's sword was used to hunt down fair-faced flying dragon and disappeared without a trace. However, Qin Shi Huang was very confident, so he didn't panic. But at this moment, When he shouted the 3 words, Taya sword, his expression changed. He hurriedly turned to look in the direction fair-faced flying dragon had fled, but there was no trace of Taya sword. Where is Taya sword? He clearly felt a connection with Taya sword, but in the next second, that connection was abruptly cut off. It was as if someone had forcibly cut it off. He knew very well what this meant. 9. Taya sword was out of his control. It was very likely that fair-faced flying dragon, who he didn't care about at all, had used some method to snatch it away. This was like pulling a tooth from the tiger's mouth. It was a brazen provocation. He roared into the sky. I will kill all of you. Kill all of you. The Empyrean fairy looked at him with a faint smile. Qin Shi Huang, you have exhausted all your tricks, and in the end, even Taya sword was taken away. Do you still have the right to be called an eternal emperor? Qin Shi Huang's expression was extremely ugly. He roared hysterically, Empyrean fairy, don't think that I won't kill you. The Empyrean fairy was not afraid at all. I will kill you too. After that, she pointed forward with her slender hand. The stately painting flew to the top of Qin Shi Huang's head, and a strong suction force suddenly appeared. Who? It was as if a black hole had appeared in the sky. The ruins on the ground were sucked into the stately painting in the blink of an eye. The first emperor of Qin swayed and stomped his feet. His feet sank into the stone slabs to resist the shocking suction force above his head. Empyrean fairy, you're dreaming if you want to absorb me into the painting to refine me, Qin Shi Huang said proudly. Even if you don't have the Taya sword, you can forget about killing me. After a slight pause, Qin Shi Huang took a deep breath and roared, Monarch fist. Boom. A huge fist rushed into the sky. Although it was still a long distance away from the painting, it was obvious that the painting was shaking violently. The Empyrean fairy was already injured, and her strength was slightly weaker. When she saw the fist hit the painting of mountains and rivers, her breath became chaotic, and she almost couldn't hold on. Monarch fist is indeed extraordinary, the Empyrean fairy said coldly, but she didn't back down at all. She shouted, 5 mountain suppression. The stately painting's aura changed abruptly. The powerful suction force disappeared without a trace and was replaced by an overwhelming aura. Gotcha! The ground under Qin Shi Huang's feet cracked rapidly, and the high steps collapsed bit by bit, as if they couldn't withstand the terrifying force. Tang Zheng watched this scene with his mouth agape. It turned out that the stately painting was far more powerful than he had imagined. Cui-san had only scratched the surface. In the hands of the Empyrean fairy, the original owner, the stately painting could unleash its true power. The ground collapsed rapidly, and the rumbling sound was endless. Tang Zheng helped the unconscious Professor Qi up, but he didn't wake him up immediately because he would definitely faint from the scene. He hurriedly retreated to the side to avoid the power that seemed to be able to destroy the heavens and earth. Boom! Finally, the high steps were crushed to pieces. Even the first emperor of Qin's figure disappeared. Was he dead? This thought popped up in Tang Zheng's mind, but when he saw the Empyrean fairy's serious expression, he immediately understood that he was too naive. Who was the first emperor of Qin? How could the emperor of Qin die so easily? Bang! A loud sound confirmed Tang Zheng's guess. The first emperor of Qin rose from the ruins and went against the flow, resisting the terrifying pressure. His huge fist directly attacked the stately painting. Boom! A powerful shock wave spread in all directions, and only the rumbling sound of collapse could be heard. The celestial palace had actually collapsed, and countless rocks fell from the sky as if it was raining. Tang Zheng knew that things were not good, and quickly protected Professor Qi from the falling rocks. So what if you have the 5 mountain suppression? I'll still destroy you. The first emperor of Qin seemed to be in a sorry state, and there were a few large holes in his robe. The stately painting was attacked, and its light immediately dimmed. Seeing this, the Empyrean fairy's expression didn't change. She said, Do you really think the stately painting is only this powerful? 5 elements wind and thunder. Crack! A thunderous explosion resounded through the celestial palace, and a bolt of lightning flew out from the stately painting, directly striking the first emperor of Qin's body. Boom! The first emperor of Qin landed on the ground again, and his body was charred black. Even the top of his head was emitting black smoke, and he looked even more miserable. Whoosh! A strong wind blew, and the sand was blinding. The flying sand and rocks seemed to have transformed into a tornado that swept towards the first emperor of Qin. In an instant, the first emperor of Qin's figure disappeared in the tornado, and only the sound of hitting could be heard. Suddenly, another thunderous explosion sounded, and a silver-white bolt of lightning fell into the tornado, mixing with the flying sand and rocks, and its power increased greatly. Time passed bit by bit, and the sound of hitting gradually stopped. Finally, everything returned to calm, and the tornado and lightning disappeared without a trace. The first emperor of Qin lay on the ground, and wisps of black smoke rose from his body. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The Empyrean fairy's face became a little pale. She was already injured, and using these great divine powers consumed a lot of her power. She was already feeling that she couldn't hold on anymore. She stared at the first emperor of Qin without blinking, as if confirming whether he was really dead or not. If he wasn't dead, what should she do? She already didn't have any extra power to continue. Tang Zheng was also looking at the first emperor of Qin. Of course, he didn't ignore the Empyrean fairy. Looking at her expression, his heart thumped, and he already knew that the situation was very serious. Bah! A soft sound rang out, and then they saw the first emperor of Qin slowly get up. He spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, and his face was covered in dust. He didn't have any of the awe-inspiring might of an ancient emperor. However, the anger in his eyes made the two of them feel deeply uneasy. Not only was he not dead, but his anger was even more intense, and it was as if he was about to burn. You have finally completely stimulated my killing intent. Empyrean fairy, for the rest of your life, you can be my slave and cheat. Don't ever think of raising your proud head again. As for you, we are both Skywalkers, but there can only be one Skywalker in this world, so you must die. After saying that, he didn't give the two of them any time to react and had already disappeared on the spot. Then, he stood in front of Tang Zheng. Monarch Fist. The huge fist hit Tang Zheng's forehead without any fancy moves. Pong! He flew out, and was thrown far away into the ruins without any sound. The first emperor of Qin didn't pay attention to Tang Zheng anymore, because he believed that his fist would definitely shatter his opponent's head. He couldn't be more dead. You. This time, the Empyrean fairy didn't have time to help. She looked on helplessly as Tang Zheng was hit in the head. She was both angry and unwilling. This eyesore is dead, then you are mine. Today, I will take you here and absorb all the Purian energy in your body. The first emperor of Qin said aggressively. A trace of redness and anger finally flashed across the Empyrean fairy's face, and she said, "Despicable and shameless." She had a deep feeling of powerlessness. A few thousand years ago, she protected her body and didn't let the first emperor of Qin have his way. Could it be that today, she couldn't escape from the devil's claws in the end? Was this her fate? No, she definitely wouldn't easily accept her fate. She recalled the stately painting and faced the first emperor of Qin, saying, "I won't let you have your way, even if I die. In front of me, you won't have the chance to die even if you want to." The first emperor of Qin said domineeringly, and his large hand reached out to grab the Empyrean fairy's neck. The Empyrean fairy hurriedly dodged, leaving a long mark on the ground. However, the first emperor of Qin's speed was faster than her, and he followed her like a shadow, forcing her into a dead end in an instant. She gathered all the energy in her body and once again activated the stately painting, and a huge suction force was produced again. This move again, do you think it will succeed? The first emperor of Qin was already prepared, and he moved like lightning. Before that suction force could envelop him, the stately painting changed hands and fell into his hands. The Empyrean fairy's eyes dimmed, and she stared blankly at her empty hands. If I hadn't spoiled you and taken care of your feelings back then, why would I wait until today? This time, I won't be soft-hearted anymore. You women are often cheap, and the only way is to make you submit, Submit wholeheartedly, the first emperor of Qin said domineeringly. Don't even think about it. Although she didn't have any Dharma treasures, the Empyrean fairy still didn't give up without a fight. She pushed her palms forward, and a surging power surged toward the first emperor of Qin. The first emperor of Qin laughed mockingly. An arrow at the end of its flight, pointless resistance. Bang! After breaking the Empyrean fairy's attack with one move, the Empyrean fairy staggered back, but she crashed into the wall and had nowhere to retreat. The first emperor of Qin moved forward and blocked the Empyrean fairy's path of retreat. He laughed maniacally. Submit to me, or else, the one who will suffer will be you. Pooh! The Empyrean fairy raised her head high and spat a mouthful of saliva on the first emperor of Qin's face. That dust-covered face and the saliva looked comical and laughable. The awe-inspiring aura of an ancient emperor was completely gone. The first emperor of Qin's eyes widened, and he grabbed the Empyrean fairy with his large hand, firmly imprisoning her so that she couldn't move. Chapter 738. The Empyrean fairy was in despair. After thousands of years, she still couldn't escape from Qin Shi Huang's evil claws. She couldn't live, but she couldn't die. Qin Shi Huang's hand was about to touch the Empyrean fairy's clothes when suddenly, a dragon's roar resounded through the sky. The heaven and earth shook as if the earth was shaking. What happened? Qin Shi Huang and the Empyrean fairy were both shocked and looked towards the direction of the dragon's roar. A golden light soared into the sky and turned into a golden dragon. It soared into the sky as if it was going to soar into the clouds. Qin Shi Huang was dumbfounded. He was really shocked by this scene and didn't understand what was going on. Suddenly, his pupils shrank as he saw a blurry face in the golden light. It was Tang Zheng. This brat didn't die. Qin Shi Huang couldn't believe it. Impossible. My fist hit his head. Even if it was made of steel, it would be smashed into pieces. How did he survive? Seeing this, the Empyrean fairy's cold eyes lit up. She mocked. Zheng, you claim to be the #1 in the world, but your opponent is also a celestial. Do you think he can be killed so easily? Qin Shi Huang glared at her fiercely and retracted his hand. I will take care of him first, then I will take care of you. His finger touched her body, and she couldn't move. She could only watch as Qin Shi Huang rushed towards Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng's eyes shone with golden light as he floated in the air. His consciousness was very clear. Just now, that punch almost took his life, but at the crucial moment, the dragon mark on his forehead was activated. That three-clawed golden dragon actually rushed out from his forehead and blocked most of Qin Shi Huang's attack, saving his life. The appearance of the three-clawed golden dragon surprised Tang Zheng. He and the golden dragon seemed to have merged into one, becoming one. Suddenly, he felt that the bottom of his feet was light as he involuntarily rose into the air. A gust of air rushed out from his throat. He looked up to the sky and roared. The dragon's roar shook the surroundings. He was dumbstruck. He could actually let out a dragon's roar. Before he could figure out the reason behind it, he felt a surge of energy rushing into his body from the heavens and the earth, instantly flowing through his 8 extraordinary meridians. This is dragon energy. Tang Zheng was shocked. He was not unfamiliar with this golden energy. Back then, he had absorbed the dragon chi of the 5-clawed golden dragon. Generations of emperors also wanted to absorb the dragon chi to consolidate their dragon might. But why would there be dragon chi in this tomb? Tang Zheng did not see a dragon. Could it be Qin Shi Huang? Impossible. As an emperor, even though Qin Shi Huang's dragon might was very strong, Tang Zheng did not feel any dragon chi. He looked around, but it was empty. The huge celestial palace was extremely dark, and there was not a single dragon in sight. The ground was still trembling, and the rocks on the ground floated up bit by bit. The first emperor of Qin transformed into an afterimage and passed through the floating rocks, arriving in front of Tang Zheng. Looking at Tang Zheng at such a close distance, he once again felt a deep shock. As an emperor of Qin Shi Huang, he understood the use of dragons too well. Emperors were seen as the incarnation of true dragons, but in fact, that was all self-deception. or to deceive the people of the world. How could they be the incarnation of true dragons? They were just mortal bodies. But the emperors of each dynasty had never given up on the extravagant hope of transforming into dragons, and Qin Shi Huang was no exception. Other than seeking immortality, he also searched everywhere for traces of true dragons. However, the whereabouts of dragons were mysterious, and there was no place to find them. But he was the ruler of a country after all. With a single order, thousands of people rushed about, and finally, they found a dragon vein in the Qinling Mountains. The dragon vein was hidden in the mountains. It was said that the undulating Qinling Mountains was transformed from a true dragon that had died in battle, and the dragon vein of the true dragon was also hidden in this undulating mountain range. Qin Shi Huang was overjoyed and sent a large number of people to dig up the mountains and stones in an attempt to dig out the dragon vein. Qin Shi Huang believed that as long as he had this dragon vein, it would not be an extravagant hope for him to transform into the true dragon son of heaven. However, things did not go as he wished. Even with the power of the country, he could not find any trace of the dragon vein. But he firmly believed that the dragon vein was hidden in the Qinling Mountains. There was no doubt about it. He was not willing to admit defeat like this, so he built his own tomb at the location of the dragon vein's head, trying to sleep with the dragon vein. Or maybe he could absorb the dragon vein after he died. All of these were extravagant hopes. In these thousands of years, the dragon vein did not appear, which made him almost despair. He even doubted whether his previous judgment was correct. Was there really a dragon vein hidden in the Qinling Mountains? But looking at the living golden dragon in front of him, he was extremely shocked. He had been searching for a dragon his whole life, but he did not see it until he died. This brat's cultivation was so weak. How could he merge with the dragon? They were all Skywalkers, but why was the gap between them so big? He was not willing to accept it, but he was not afraid. Instead, he was faintly excited. Since the dragon had appeared, then he could replace it. Then wouldn't he be able to transform into a dragon? Once this thought appeared, it crazily occupied every one of his brain cells. His eyes became excited. This method was definitely feasible. Ha! The heavens are helping me, allowing me to obtain such a big gift that I have always dreamed of when I was revived. Qin Shi Huang laughed wildly. He took a step forward, and the soles of his feet landed on the void. He walked toward Tang Zheng as if he was walking on flat ground. The Empyrean fairy's heart skipped a beat, and she turned pale with fright. She guessed Qin Shi Huang's intention and warned, "Be careful." Tang Zheng stared blankly as Qin Shi Huang walked over. He raised both of his hands and pointed his 5 fingers upwards. The dragon chi between heaven and earth madly surged into his palms. Whoosh! Whoosh! The golden light on his body surged, and in an instant, the golden dragon became 10 meters long, full of dragon might. Tang Zheng was inside the dragon muck. His eyes were the golden dragon's eyes, his hands were the golden dragon's dragon claws, and his legs were the golden dragon's dragon tail. Qin Shi Huang was overjoyed. He clicked his tongue and praised, "It's indeed magical. Now that I've replaced you, your mission will end here." Qin Shi Huang's attention was completely focused on Tang Zheng. He did not notice that the dragon aura in the air was getting thicker and thicker, and it was completely gathering on Tang Zheng's body. Traces of golden light seeped out from the ground, and the ground shook more and more violently. It was as if thousands of arrows had been shot into the sky. When the Empyrean fairy saw the golden light on the ground, her expression changed slightly. She muttered to herself, "The dragon vein. So the dragon vein really exists. He is actually absorbing it." Yes, Tang Zheng was absorbing the dragon vein. The 3-clawed golden dragon had revealed its true form and triggered the dragon vein hidden in the Qinling Mountains. As a result, the intense dragon aura broke through the restraints of the ground and was attracted by Tang Zheng. Moreover, that was not all. The golden light was the real dragon vein. When it completely broke out of the ground, the energy was the most terrifying. It was not something the current dragon aura could compare to. Qin Shi Huang did not notice this. He only had eyes for Tang Zheng. Finally, he could not hold it in anymore. He roared, "Monarch Fist," and attacked Tang Zheng with his iron fist. "Who? With a thought, Tang Zheng swept out his dragon tail, bringing along a violent wind, and ruthlessly lashed at Qin Shi Huang's fist. Qin Shi Huang retreated a few steps, but rushed forward as if he was flying. He grabbed the dragon tail and laughed sinisterly. "True dragon, ha! I am the true son of heaven. This is all mine." After saying that, a black light flashed in his palm. The black light quickly spread and wrapped around the dragon tail. Hiss! Wisps of dragon aura surged and were absorbed into Qin Shi Huang's palm. Then, his body was slowly covered by the golden light. "Ha! This is the true dragon. I am finally going to get what I want." Qin Shi Huang's long hair fluttered in the wind, and his face was filled with madness. Tang Zheng was shocked. He realized that the dragon aura in his body was flowing out bit by bit into Qin Shi Huang's body. "No, I can't let him have his way." Tang Zheng quickly circulated the dragon god art. In an instant, the dragon aura in the world surged into his body. Pooh! The golden light on the ground soared into the sky. A golden dragon vein broke out of the ground and flew straight to Tang Zheng. Qin Shi Huang also finally discovered this golden light and shouted in joy, "Dragon vein! Ha! So there really is a dragon vein. The heavens are helping me. With his dragon body and the dragon vein, I can transform into a dragon. Perfect." Tang Zheng had also heard of the legend of the Qinling Mountains being a dragon vein, but he did not expect to see one. Moreover, the dragon vein flew straight to him, wanting to merge with him. He was overjoyed. If he had the dragon vein, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Perhaps he could get out of the predicament in front of him. Roar! A dragon roar burst out of his throat. He grabbed with both hands, and the dragon claws grabbed Qin Shi Huang's shoulders. Whoosh! Qin Shi Huang was thrown out. Tang Zheng took this opportunity to pounce towards the dragon vein that was slowly rising into the air. The dragon vein was a golden light, but he could clearly feel the powerful energy it contained. The dragon tail swung and wrapped around the dragon vein. The dragon vein flashed with golden light and disappeared into the dragon tail in the blink of an eye. The golden dragon instantly turned transparent. He could clearly see the dragon vein spreading from the dragon tail to the dragon head. Wherever it passed, palm-sized scales appeared on the golden dragon's body. They shone with golden light. Soon, the dragon tail was completely covered by the golden scales and quickly spread to the dragon head. Tang Zheng's eyes flickered with golden light. He felt a powerful force flowing from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. There was an inexhaustible strength. "Be careful." Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy's voice sounded again. Tang Zheng's heart trembled, but it was too late. Qin Shi Huang silently grabbed the dragon tail again. The black light immediately covered the scales. The dragon vein's rising momentum suddenly stopped. Instead, it slowly swam toward Qin Shi Huang. "Ha! I have been searching for the dragon vein my entire life. Do you really think it will be so easy for you to absorb it? These are all mine. No one should even think of touching my things." "Absorb." Qin Shi Huang let out an earth-shattering roar. The dragon vein was absorbed into his body with a whoosh. In an instant, his entire body was enveloped by golden light, and golden scales appeared on his body. Chapter 739. Tang Zheng watched helplessly as the dragon vein was sucked into Qin Shi Huang's body. His heart was filled with grief. Furthermore, he felt that the dragon qi in his body was still being sucked away. After a while, all the energy in his body would disappear. Qin Shi Huang proudly looked at Tang Zheng and said, "The one who laughs at the end is the winner. The winner is the king and the loser is the bandit. Success will always belong to me." The Empyrean fairy was powerless. Her eyes finally flashed with despair. If Qin Shi Huang transformed into a dragon, then she would not have the slightest bit of resistance. Tang Zheng did not accept his fate. He continued to circulate his energy to resist. The three-clawed golden dragon flew into the sky and crashed into the towering palace, causing rocks to fly everywhere. However, Qin Shi Huang was like a maggot. He could not get rid of it. His hands firmly held onto the dragon's tail. The golden light on his body became brighter and brighter. On the other hand, Tang Zheng's dragon body became dimmer and dimmer. My dragon chi will soon be sucked away by him. Damn it, Tang Zheng hatefully said. He felt that his strength was gradually weakening. Am I going to let him off so easily? When I heard that he fought Yamato no Orochi, I originally thought that he was a peerless hero. Who would have thought that his true face was like this? No, I can't admit defeat like this. Tang Zheng raised his head high and took a deep breath, circulating all of his energy to resist. However, Qin Shi Huang's hands seemed to have some sort of magical power, causing his resistance to be completely useless. Instead, his dragon chi was sucked away like a waterfall. Isn't he also a celestial? Furthermore, he needs to absorb the Empyrean Fairy's pure yin energy to offset the pure yang energy in his body. Since he likes to absorb energy, then I will give him the pure yang energy in my body and let him absorb as much as he wants. Tang Zheng thought of a plan and hurriedly circulated his power. The pure yang force in his body was already quite a bit, especially after his power had increased greatly during this period of time. The pure yang force had been on the verge of erupting several times. However, the pure yang energy was an inherent energy in his body. He could not expel it out. However, Qin Shi Huang's ability to absorb energy was so powerful. Perhaps he could really absorb the pure yang energy as well. Traces of pure yang energy fused with the dragon chi and flowed from his 8 extraordinary meridians to Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang was oblivious as he continued to crazily absorb the dragon aura. His body was already covered by a layer of golden scales as the golden light gradually transformed into a dragon's body. Tang Zheng's dragon body had already shrunk countless times, and it was still shrinking. He felt that he was about to be sucked dry, and there wasn't much pure yang energy left. Finally, Tang Zheng's dragon body collapsed and the golden light disappeared. He fell from the sky and crashed heavily onto the ground. Qin Shi Huang did not give chase. Instead, he raised his hands and looked at the dragon claws that were gradually growing. He laughed wildly in excitement. His laughter shook the surrounding rocks and caused them to fall down. Son of Heaven, I am the true Son of Heaven, Qin Shi Huang said proudly. He looked down at Tang Zheng, an Empyrean Fairy. Kid, you have fulfilled my wish. I will leave you with an intact corpse. As for you, Empyrean Fairy, don't worry. I won't kill you. You are now even less my match. Therefore, I will keep you alive and let you watch me unify the world again. I will be the greatest emperor since ancient times. Empyrean Fairy didn't say a word, but the hatred in her eyes had already explained everything. Tang Zheng got up from the ground and looked at Qin Shi Huang indignantly. He had tried every means to save himself, but he ultimately failed. Qin Shi Huang flew in front of Tang Zheng and gathered his dragon claws into a fist. He punched down and the ground immediately caved in. Tang Zheng stood in the middle of the pit and struggled to resist the terrifying power above his head. Now, not only had he lost his dragon aura, but a lot of his true chi and pure yang energy had also been absorbed. Therefore, even an ordinary warrior would find it difficult to resist, let alone a super expert like Qin Shi Huang. Let's see how you escape from death this time, Qin Shi Huang said hatefully. Clearly, he was still brooding over his failure to kill Tang Zheng. At this moment, Tang Zheng was absolutely powerless to fight back. As long as he was hit, he would die without a doubt. The three of them were very clear about this point and had completely different reactions. Tang Zheng raised his head like a heroic warrior. Empyrean Fairy's eyes flashed with sorrow. Qin Shi Huang, who had the true dragon golden body, would be difficult to find a match. It was unknown how many bloody storms would be stirred up and how many people would die at his hands. Suddenly, under everyone's gaze, the attack of the dragon claws came to a halt. Qin Shi Huang's entire body trembled. The scales on his body flickered and then shattered bit by bit. What's going on? Tang Zheng, an Empyrean Fairy, turned pale with fright. Qin Shi Huang's strength had already reached the peak. No matter how they looked at it, his current situation was not optimistic. Ah! A miserable scream came out of Qin Shi Huang's mouth, scaring everyone. How could this be? How could this be? How could the pure yang energy erupt? Qin Shi Huang roared hysterically. Tang Zheng was stunned for a moment and then became ecstatic. He originally thought that his plan had failed and that the pure yang energy that was sucked away was unable to do anything to Qin Shi Huang. He never thought that it was because the pure yang energy had yet to erupt. Qin Shi Huang's strength was profound, so naturally, the pure yang energy in his body was also very powerful. Furthermore, it was pure yang energy that had been accumulated for thousands of years. It was easy to imagine how terrifying the amount was. Tang Zheng's pure yang energy was like a drop of water that dripped into his body. The pure yang energy in his body was already about to overflow. With the injection of this drop of pure yang energy, it immediately caused the pure yang energy to completely erupt. Tang Zheng clearly remembered the scene that Tianqianzi had described to him. A person with the 9 yang saint body would explode and die after the pure yang energy completely erupted. At this moment, witnessing this scene with his own eyes, the shock it caused to him was imaginable. Qin Shi Huang stared at Tang Zheng condescendingly and roared fiercely, "Brat, it was you who did this. You gave me the pure yang energy in your body." The corner of Tang Zheng's mouth squeezed out a smile and said, "Didn't you want my dragon qi, my power? I'll give them all to you. All to you. How does it feel?" "No!" Qin Shi Huang roared at the top of his lungs. With the sound of the red dragon's explosion, the true dragon's body completely exploded, turning into specks of golden light that floated in the air. The true dragon's golden body had been destroyed. "I won't let you succeed. I won't." Qin Shi Huang hurriedly circulated his energy, wanting to resist the pure yang energy. However, the pure yang energy had already completely exploded, so all of his efforts were in vain. He watched helplessly as the pure yang energy in his veins seemed to turn into flames, burning every cell in his body bit by bit. Purine energy, yin and yang balance. Qin Shi Huang muttered as his eyes immediately locked onto the Empyrean fairy. Like a drowning person grabbing onto a life-saving straw, he muttered, "Yin and yang balance, yin and yang balance." He crazily rushed towards the Empyrean fairy. No. Tang Zheng immediately saw through Qin Shi Huang's intentions. He wanted to possess the Empyrean fairy and use the pure yin energy in her body to balance yin and yang, thus resolving the danger of self-destruction. If Qin Shi Huang succeeded, then all of Tang Zheng's efforts would be in vain. He really would not have any chance of survival. However, his voice was of no use, and he could only watch as everything unfolded before him. The Empyrean fairy was imprisoned and could not move. Seeing Qin Shi Huang about to violate her but unable to do anything, a trace of sadness flashed across her heart. Qin Shi Huang rushed in front of the Empyrean fairy and stretched out his demonic claws. Just as he was about to make the next move, a bloody light suddenly broke through his body. Blood splattered everywhere, filling the sky. "Ah, no, why? I was so close to succeeding." Qin Shi Huang roared unwillingly. However, streaks of bloody light rushed out from his body. Not long later, his body was full of holes. Blood flowed out from his 7 orifices, and his prestige was completely gone. When Tang Zheng and the Empyrean fairy saw this scene, they were overjoyed, and their eyes lit up. Tang Zheng could not help but shout success. He finally succeeded. The Empyrean fairy said coldly, "Ing Zheng, you should have died thousands of years ago. This is your destiny. Do you really think you can escape the arrangement of the heavenly Tao? Your time of death has come. I am the emperor of all ages. I am not willing. I cannot die like this. I am the true dragon son of heaven. I have the true dragon golden body." Qin Shi Huang chattered incessantly as he lost his head out of fear. Suddenly, his voice came to an abrupt stop. Then, with a boom that was even more deafening than thunder, Qin Shi Huang's body completely exploded, turning into a mass of bloody light that scattered in all directions. The huge shockwave caused the heavenly palace to shake more and more violently. Rocks flew everywhere, and the rumbling was incessant. Qin Shi Huang was dead. He exploded and died. Tang Zheng stared blankly at this scene. Other than rejoicing, fear also followed like a shadow. Because, he was also in danger of exploding and dying. I don't want to become that mass of bloody light. Tang Zheng hurriedly shook his head and chased this terrifying thought out of his mind. He gradually solidified a belief in his heart. In the future, he must absorb more purine energy and harmonize yin and yang. He must not follow in the footsteps of Qin Shi Huang. A strand of golden light slowly rose from the mass of bloody light, attracting Tang Zheng's attention. Dragon vein. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. Although Qin Shi Huang was dead, the dragon vein was not destroyed. He hurriedly dragged his leaden legs and rushed over, grabbing the dragon vein. The dragon vein drilled into his palm like a small snake, wriggling forward. Not long after, it slithered to the 9 main meridians and continuously circled around a meridian. Skywalkers had 9 main meridians, one more than normal people had 8 main meridians. At this moment, the dragon vein was circling around the extra main meridian. That main meridian was gradually dyed gold. Finally, it merged with the dragon vein, becoming one. Immediately, Tang Zheng's 9th main meridian became the dragon vein. Whoosh whoosh. Chapter 740. Tang Zheng felt like he was a lake that was about to dry up. Suddenly, a flood gushed in, nourishing every inch of his skin and every cell. He could not help but moan in comfort. However, the flood was pure energy that flowed through his 8 extraordinary meridians, making him feel like the energy was about to burst out of his body. However, this was not the effect of the pure yang energy. He had only absorbed the purest dragon qi, not the pure yang energy. The pure yang energy had disappeared the moment Emperor Qin self-destructed. After the golden dragon qi entered his body, it split into 2. One went straight to his dantian, while the other stayed in his glabella. In an instant, he was completely enveloped by the golden light. The 3-clawed golden dragon in the dragon seal shook its head and wagged its tail. It kept absorbing the dragon qi, and the golden light on its body became more and more intense. However, one could clearly see that there was still a golden trace on the dragon, as if a tendon ran through its entire body. The dragon vein. Tang Zheng immediately recognized it. The dragon vein had merged with his 9th major meridian. He did not expect it to appear on the 3-clawed golden dragon. He had a feeling that the 3-clawed golden dragon had always been one with him. At the same time, more and more dragon qi gathered in his dantian, circling in his dantian. The dragon qi was changing, becoming denser and denser. Tang Zheng suddenly had a feeling that his Jindan was about to reach the large success stage. The Empyrean fairy also saw this and reminded loudly, "Condensing the golden core is a very critical moment. Do your best and don't be careless. Sit down cross-legged." Tang Zheng sat down as instructed. The dragon qi between heaven and earth rushed into his body at an even faster speed. This was the first time in his life that Tang Zheng condensed the golden core. He had no experience at all. He could only rely on his imagination. However, the reality was always several times more difficult than he imagined. The dragon qi was still circling, but it did not start condensing the golden core. Time passed by. Tang Zheng wanted to do it, but he was powerless. He could not help but feel impatient and flustered. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy's voice rang in his ears. "Focus your mind and calm your breath. I will teach you the core condensation method. This is a miraculous method to condense the golden core. You have absorbed so much dragon qi. With the help of the core condensation method, the quality of the golden core you condense will be greatly improved." Tang Zheng was overjoyed and said, "Thank you, Empyrean fairy." A simple and not complicated text was whispered into Tang Zheng's ears. Tang Zheng was quick-witted and had a good comprehension ability. He instantly understood the trick and channeled the dragon qi bit by bit. Whoosh! The dragon energy quickly gathered and gradually turned from a gaseous state to a liquid state. Moreover, the golden luster became even more dazzling. Tang Zheng could clearly see that at the very center, a smald was beginning to condense from a liquid state into a solid state. It was like a seed, and as the seed grew bigger, more and more dragon qi gathered. His dantian turned into a golden light and penetrated through his dantian. Inch by inch, his skin and bones came out from the surface of his skin. Seeing this, the Empyrean fairy muttered to herself, "Skywalkers are indeed blessed by the heavens." Condensing the golden core is the most important step, and he actually used dragon chi. The quality of this dragon chi is much higher than a normal golden core. It will be very beneficial for his future cultivation. Other people spend 10% of their energy to cultivate, but he only needs 5%. She seemed to be envious of Tang Zheng's good fortune. Tang Zheng did not know this. He was trying his best to condense the golden core. He watched as the golden core slowly grew from nothing to bigger. It was like the golden core was his child. This feeling was very strange. The dragon chi in the sky was completely absorbed into his body. The golden core also stopped spinning. There was no more dragon chi in his dantian. Only the golden core was left floating quietly in his dantian. Tang Zheng moved his mind. A surge of true chi was released from the golden core and flowed to all of his meridians. This surge of true chi was much purer than before, and the energy it contained was even more terrifying. Is this the golden core realm? Tang Zheng was very happy. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They were filled with endless power. The true chi that was originally stored in the 9 main meridians was of course gone. It was all integrated into the golden core. From this moment on, the golden core was his source of power. If his gold core was depleted, then his power would be completely gone. Tang Zheng understood this, so he secretly swore to protect the golden core. It was his lifeblood. Rumble. The heavenly palace shook more and more violently. Just now, he was immersed in his cultivation and did not notice the dangerous environment outside. The impact of Qin Shi Huang's self-destruction made the heavenly palace on the verge of collapse. "I can't stay here for long." Tang Zheng rushed in front of the Empyrean fairy. Looking at her motionless body, he asked, "I'll undo your restriction." His fingers quickly touched her body. The elasticity of her skin was clearly transmitted through his fingers, causing his heart to skip a beat. The Empyrean fairy felt a strange feeling in her heart, but her face was as cold as ice. After regaining her freedom, she impatiently urged, "The heavenly palace is about to collapse. Let's leave here immediately." "Yes." Tang Zheng picked up the unconscious Professor Qi on the ground and rushed out of the heavenly palace with the Empyrean fairy behind him. Rumble. With a loud sound, the heavenly palace collapsed and turned into dust. It was a ruin. Tang Zheng looked at the scene in a daze and sighed. Qin Shi Huang did everything he could, but in the end, he ended up like this? This is his fate. He should have died a few thousand years ago, but he used some kind of secret method to luckily survive and even come back to life. However, he still can't escape the eyes of the heavenly Tao. The Empyrean fairy said coldly, "The heavenly palace was so tall that it reached the clouds. It's a pity that it was destroyed." Tang Zheng smiled bitterly and sighed. "So tall that it reached the clouds?" The Empyrean fairy snorted and hit the nail on the head. "Those are all illusions. Do you really think this mausoleum is real? It's not real." Tang Zheng was shocked. He had never doubted the authenticity of this mausoleum. "Look at the stars in the sky. Why are there stars in the mausoleum?" Tang Zheng was speechless. He couldn't answer. "Those are all illusions." The Empyrean fairy waved her hand. The stars in the sky flashed and disappeared. "Ah!" Tang Zheng was dumbfounded. The illusions were too realistic, or perhaps they were too high class. Even he was deceived. "But this space is so vast that you can't see the end of it. It can't be fake, right?" Tang Zheng asked, unwilling to give up. The Empyrean fairy's lips curled into a mysterious smile and said, "This is another treasure of Qin Shi Huang. Samura world." Samura world? Tang Zheng was moved. He couldn't help but touch the Sumuru bag he carried with him. Could it be that the Sumuru world was the same as the Sumuru bag? The Empyrean fairy glanced at him and saw through his thoughts. She said, "Your storage magic weapon is the Sumuru bag, right?" "How did you know?" "I guessed. The Sumuru world is a higher-level storage treasure. It's many levels higher than your Sumuru bag. The storage space is much larger. Moreover, the Sumuru bag can only store inanimate objects. The Sumeru world is different. Even living things can live in it. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. He was dissatisfied with the flaw of the Sumeru bag. He didn't expect the Sumeru world to perfectly solve his problem. Then can I take this Sumeru world away? Tang Zheng asked eagerly. Such a powerful storage treasure couldn't be wasted. Of course you can. But after you take it away, the mausoleum will be destroyed. Tang Zheng nodded. It's good that it's destroyed. If this mausoleum were to be exposed to the outside world, who knows how many waves it would cause? Because the things inside are too mysterious, beyond common sense. If Professor Chi hadn't fainted, he would definitely have sternly objected. But now, he didn't have the right to speak. Since that's the case, then this Sumeru world is yours. The Empyrean fairy said naturally and generously. Her large hand grabbed at the void. She frowned. There's something else here? Tang Zheng immediately remembered those terracotta figures and hurriedly told her. The Empyrean fairy coldly snorted and said, those are the tricks that Qin Shi Huang liked. Even if he died, he would still forge these things to protect himself. But in the end, everything was wasted. These things are very annoying. I'll help you destroy them all. Wait a moment. Tang Zheng's mind moved. He remembered the bronze masks on the terracotta figures. They contained spiritual energy that could increase one's cultivation. He had just broken through and didn't need it for the time being. But once he stabilized his cultivation, he would need a large amount of spiritual energy to cultivate. He couldn't just waste it. What's wrong? Those terracotta figures are still useful to me, Tang Zheng said somewhat embarrassedly. He was really too greedy. The Empyrean fairy didn't mind and said, then I'll give them to you together with Sumeru world. Once you have Sumeru world, those terracotta figures won't be able to harm you. As her voice fell, her slender white hand reached into the sky. A ray of light shot up into the sky as if it wanted to break through the dome of heaven. It rose into the air and exploded with a loud bang. Then, Tang Zheng saw that above his head was a dome of heaven. This Sumeru world really did have a boundary. It was just that it was too dark so he couldn't see it. Space fluctuated rapidly and quickly shrank. Suddenly, Tang Zheng felt his body sway. Everything in front of him disappeared. He was actually in front of the tomb again. The huge space behind him had completely disappeared. It turned out that in this ancient tomb, only the huge tomb door was man-made. The rest of the place was created using Sumeru world. This kind of divine ability caused Tang Zheng to be unable to calm down for a long time. This was a truly great divine ability. The Empyrean fairy stood in front of him. She handed him a bracelet and said, this is Sumeru world. Bracelet? Qin Shi Huang is already dead. His consciousness has already been erased. After you drip a drop of blood essence on it, Sumeru world will be yours. Tang Zheng hurriedly circulated his energy. A drop of blood essence dripped from his fingertips and entered the bracelet. The bracelet flashed and disappeared. A faint mark appeared on Tang Zheng's wrist. It looked like a bracelet. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to see it at all. This was much more powerful than a Sumeru bag. There was no need to worry about losing it. Chapter 741. Tang Zheng turned pale with fright and hurriedly helped the Empyrean fairy up. Seeing her pale face and closed eyes, he shouted, what happened to you? The Empyrean fairy did not respond. Could it be that she was seriously injured in the battle? Tang Zheng hurriedly checked her injuries, but when his true qi entered her body, he felt it was repelled by a cold and powerful force. Tang Zheng was helpless. Without a doubt, the Empyrean fairy's cultivation was much higher than his. His true qi was treated as an external threat and was directly blocked outside of her body. He changed to the ordinary method of diagnosis, taking her pulse. Her pulse was stable, and there was nothing wrong. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. He thought that the battle just now must have consumed too much of her energy, so she fainted for a while. Since there was no major problem, he was relieved. It's not good to stay here for long. Let's leave first. Tang Zheng looked at Professor Qi and then looked at the Empyrean fairy. It was not easy to support the two of them through the narrow mountain path. Thus, he simply put the two of them into Sumara heavens. Sumara heavens. Tang Zheng's consciousness extended inside. Immediately, he knew the situation inside like the back of his hand. There were tens of thousands of terracotta figures, standing in front of the altar like old monks in meditation. The ruins of the heavenly palace were very eye-catching. Tang Zheng directly cleared out the ruins and piled them up in the mausoleum. Then, he glanced at the huge mausoleum door and left without looking back. Seeing the sun again, the sun shone down and his mood was particularly good. Although this time he did not discover the secret of the celestial, he still saw the legendary Qin Shi Huang. Although it was very different, he still gained a lot. His cultivation had already broken through to the first stage of the golden core. Although he could not determine the quality of his golden core, the quality of the golden core that was condensed from the dragon chi would not be too bad. Looking at the shining golden core, he was particularly happy. He turned his head to look at the mountain peak. With a slash of the war soul sword, the entrance collapsed with a loud bang, turning into pieces of rubble that were sealed shut. Now, no one will be able to find out. Tang Zheng did not look back as he quickly disappeared into the forest. In the evening, he arrived at the entrance of the village outside the mountain and got Professor Qi and the Empyrean Fairy out of Sumeru World. The Empyrean Fairy slowly woke up and looked up at the sky. Her eyes were filled with joy as she muttered to herself, "I'm back in this world again. Are you okay?" Tang Zheng asked. The Empyrean Fairy took a deep breath and said, "I'm fine. I just used up too much energy and fainted for a moment." "That's good." Tang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief and pointed to the village not far away. "Let's stay here tonight and go to the city tomorrow." The Empyrean Fairy looked up and saw a modern building that was completely different from the village she remembered. She frowned slightly and said, "So many things have changed in the past few thousand years." Tang Zheng nodded. "It's much bigger than you think. If you don't mind, you can stay with me first. With a companion, we can take care of each other. You can also adapt to modern life." Although the Empyrean Fairy was powerful, she might not be able to adapt to modern life. She might cause a big disturbance, or even attract the attention of the country and become a public enemy. He did not want to see that scene. The Empyrean Fairy stared at Tang Zheng for a long time without saying anything. Even though her eyes were calm, the pressure it gave off was not small. Fortunately, Tang Zheng's heart was calm and did not have any distracting thoughts, so he was not afraid. "Okay, thank you." The Empyrean Fairy agreed. She paused for a moment and said, "Although you and Qin Shi Huang are both Skywalkers, your personalities are completely different." "Of course not. I'm not as cruel as him." Tang Zheng nodded. "That's good. I'll give you a piece of advice. Even if you're strong, you can't kill too many people. Otherwise, you will definitely suffer a backlash in the future. Qin Shi Huang is a good example." The Empyrean Fairy warned. Tang Zheng's face turned cold. He said solemnly, "I'm not a homicidal maniac, and I don't have the hobby of killing people. Unless it's an enemy, I won't kill easily." "That's good. Where is this place?" Professor Qi suddenly screamed and climbed up from the ground in a panic. He looked around and asked, "Where is Qin Shi Huang? Where is he?" Obviously, he could not forget about Qin Shi Huang. Tang Zheng did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "He's dead. You won't be able to see him." "Dead?" Professor Qi exclaimed. "How could he die? Didn't he come back to life? If he didn't die, we would all die." "Professor Qi, you don't want to die, right?" Of course, who wants to die?" Professor Qi said resentfully. Suddenly, his gaze turned and looked at the empty surroundings. "We left the ancient tomb? Of course, we escaped. No, we have to go back. That was a huge discovery in the archaeological world. It will have great research value in perfecting the history of Huaxia." Professor Qi turned around and wanted to leave. Tang Zheng hurriedly pulled him back and advised, "Professor Qi, the entrance has already collapsed. As for the tomb, there's nothing left in it. There's nothing to study. If it collapsed, just dig it out." "How could there be nothing to study?" Professor Qi said stubbornly. Seeing him so stubborn, Tang Zheng could only increase his tone. He said, "Professor Qi, You've seen what you saw and heard in the ancient tomb. Is that an ordinary ancient tomb? If you let everything be exposed, what kind of commotion will it cause? Is this kind of commotion really good? This? Professor Chi hesitated. After experiencing the 100,000 mountains, he already understood that there were many mysteries in the long river of Huaxia's history. Perhaps it was not a bad thing that some secrets continued to be lost in history. Qin Shi Huang is still the face of history. As for what his true face is, other people don't care. We also don't need to overturn everyone's understanding. Just treat this trip as a dream and forget it. Tang Zheng said earnestly. Professor Qi looked at Tang Zheng with a burning gaze. Seeing the dignified expression between his brows, he gradually compromised. He had lived for most of his life and knew what was more important. His research was too insignificant compared to some things. Moreover, with Tang Zheng's identity, his words must have been carefully considered. There were many problems that he had not even considered. In addition, Tang Zheng would definitely not harm him. This was definitely the most beneficial solution for him. All right, I promise you. Professor Qi took a deep breath. Although he was unwilling, he could only give up. However, when he turned his gaze, he saw the aloof Empyrean fairy. Even though he had lived for most of his life and seen countless people, when he saw the Empyrean fairy, he could not help but be shocked. He cried out in surprise, "Who is she?" Professor Qi had seen beautiful women before, but those beauties were vulgar compared to the Empyrean fairy. Whether it was beauty or temperament, none of them could compare to her. Fairy, a fairy above the 9 heavens. Professor Qi's eyes were lifeless as he muttered to himself. There are beauties in the north, peerless and independent. A glance could topple a city. A second glance could topple a country. Would you rather not topple a city or a country? A beauty is hard to come by. Tang Zheng was shocked. He did not expect the Empyrean fairy to have such great charm. Although he also felt that the Empyrean fairy's beauty was unparalleled, it was not so exaggerated. He did not know just how shocking the Empyrean fairy's temperament was to ordinary people. Furthermore, he was a celestial with the 9 young saint body. His resistance to the Empyrean fairy was naturally extraordinary. It was not something an ordinary person could compare to. The Empyrean fairy seemed to have already gotten used to this kind of reaction. She was not surprised at all. She indifferently glanced at Professor Qi and then stared at the village not far away. It was clear that the modern village was quite attractive to her. Tang Zheng hurriedly pulled Professor Qi out of his shock and said, "Professor Qi, he is my first friend. He will be traveling with us for the time being." Friend? Why wasn't she here before? She came to the Qinling Mountains to travel and coincidentally bumped into her. So we traveled together. Tang Zheng lied without thinking. "Oh, may I ask for this young lady's name?" Professor Qi said in a genteel manner. Tang Zheng was momentarily speechless. He also did not know what the Empyrean fairy's name was. He could not possibly introduce her as the Empyrean fairy. Then wouldn't his lie be exposed? The Empyrean fairy did not turn her head and said, "Fu Yao?" "Fu Yao?" Professor Qi smacked his lips. The surname Fu is an ancient surname. There are not many of them in the modern era. The Empyrean fairy turned a deaf ear. Tang Zheng secretly remembered this name. He quickly changed the topic and said, "Professor Qi, everyone is tired. Let's find a hotel to rest first." "Oh, okay. There are girls here, so we can't rush around too much," Professor Qi said in a gentlemanly manner. Tang Zheng was surprised. The Empyrean fairy actually had such a charm that even Professor Qi, who did not care about women, cared so much. Who could resist this charm? Then, he finally understood what the charm of a country was. When the 3 of them stepped into the village, everyone's eyes were attracted to the Empyrean fairy. She was the center of attention in the crowd. No one could compete with her. Most importantly, she not only attracted men, but also men, women, old and young. Her charm made Tang Zheng feel ashamed of his inferiority. The owner of the hotel almost did not charge the 3 of them for their stay. Fortunately, the burly lady boss came to her senses in time and did not go bankrupt. Tang Zheng felt that if this continued, no matter where he went, he would not be at peace. He had to find an opportunity to discuss this problem with the Empyrean fairy. Because of his identity, Tangjing never wanted to be the center of attention. That night, after washing up, Professor Qi was exhausted and had already gone to bed early. Tangjing tossed and turned, unable to sleep. In the end, he still knocked on the door of the Empyrean fairy's room. Fu Yao was sitting upright on the chair watching television. It was as if the little people on the television had a huge charm to her. This was something that Tangjing had already seen before. She was full of curiosity towards modern equipment like a curious baby. However, she was very cold. Even if she was curious, she would never ask about it. Instead, she would do her own research. She was the one who unknowingly turned on the television. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.